And it looks like we might be live. I think we're live. So, hello. Before we really get started, I want to thank Noel Plum once again for putting me in touch with the academic agent. And I also want to remember to thank Steve McRae for helping to plug this discussion in his great debate community on G+. If you haven't heard about that community or joined that community, you might want to go check it out. I'll leave a link in the description. It's a large G+ community where people come and congregate and discuss all kinds of issues related to the great debate community in one way or another. And from there, you also can get alerted to and sort of connected with whatever's happening in our little corner of the internet. So with that out of the way, Jack, I'd like you to meet capitalist, the academic agent. And academic agent, say hello to Marxist, Leninist, Jack Angstreich.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay.
Everything all right?
Yeah.
Everybody sounds good. All right, well, I wanted this discussion to take place after I watched the debate, Socialism versus Capitalism, a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. And that debate kind of confirmed some of my own suspicions that I just don't think most people, me included, don't seem to really know what the labor theory of value is or how it connects to prices, if it does, and I guess what and how it makes predictions about capitalism, if it does. So what I thought we would do is just start with Jack to define and explain the theory. And I'm just going to back away and let the two of you have an unmoderated exchange. So I'll be trying to collect any kind of questions that come from the live chat, just in case we might have time for a Q&A. So if anybody who's listening wants to post any questions in the live chat, I'll try to capture them and I'll ask them if we have time. So Jack, start us off by defining and explaining the labor theory of value.
Well, I mean, I can only, in this space of time, give you a brief sketch of it, because it's actually a fairly complicated theory. But I can give you the basic idea, which is basically it was developed to explain equilibrium prices, or what Adam Smith called natural prices. And it's simply that if we were to draw the prices of goods, if you were to plot those prices on a graph across time, you'd notice that there'd be a basic general level of prices that would be fairly constant, right? But you would see supply and demand fluctuate. The axis, or those basic axes of prices, and the idea was took supply and demand at equilibrium. Right? If we sort of observe the market prices when supply and demand were at equilibrium, they would cancel. Obviously, fall in conditions of increased or decreased supply.
Do you want to check with this mic?
You're really cutting out, Jack. Are you on your bicycle?
Or an equilibrium when supply and demand are at equilibrium.
Jack, we missed you. We missed you cut out.
Oh, sorry. How is it now?
It's good now.
Okay. So that there's still something left to explain when supply and demand are at equilibrium. They're canceling each other out. And what's left to explain is why market price of a good would be at that level rather than another, right? If we abstract it away from supply and demand forces, right? And so Smith's hypothesis, which is an older one, I mean, it goes back to ancient times. I think it's in Aristotle, there's a labor theory of value. Smith's hypothesis was that what determined the equilibrium price was the quantity of labor to make that good. But Smith was sort of unable to resolve certain theoretical problems with that account, and ended up developing in The Wealth of Nations simultaneously two theories of value, a labor theory of value as well as a subjective theory of value. David Ricardo, several decades later, tried to resolve some of the theoretical problems in Smith. Wasn't able to fully do that, but made some improvements to the theory. But then Karl Marx, attempted to resolve the remaining problems that were in Ricardo's labor theory of value. And so Marx's theory is based on the idea that, well, first of all, he postulates a theoretical, what might be described as a theoretical unobservable value. And value is meant to explain equilibrium prices. So the basic idea is that under certain restricted conditions, value will coincide with equilibrium prices. But then the question is, what determines value? And Marx's hypothesis was that it was the average quantity, basically the determinant for value for Marx, at least his hypothesis is that what determines value is the average quantity per time that it takes to reproduce the good at a given time and place. And I think Marx's interest in that believed that if you developed this theory, sort of developed the logical implications of this theory, you could then have a basis by which to predict the laws of motion, what he called the laws of motion of the capitalist mode of production. So the purpose of the labor theory of value for Marx was to describe the laws of motion of the capitalist mode of production. So that's more or less the basic idea.
Would you like me to say something in response, or how do you want to do this?
I don't know what Helena's format is.
I just thought that I would let you guys interact.
Right. So I understood your view to be that the labor theory of value was wrong. I think, in fact, you said it was emphatically wrong. So yeah. I wanted to understand what the arguments you had in support of that claim were.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I do think it is wrong, and I think it's important to point out that today, in 2017, virtually no reputable economists at all across the political spectrum, including people who I perceive as total charlatans like Paul Krugman, say, or members of the Keynesian school, even they today reject the labor theory of value. So there are no professional economists working who still use this. Ricardo was proven to be wrong, and by default, Marx was also proven to be wrong on this. And he was wrong really for two key reasons, which I'll go into. The first of which is that value is subjective. The price is always dictated by the market. Okay, a very simple. We can see this in everyday life all the time. Go to, for example, an auction. Just a regular auction. It doesn't matter what the items you're bidding on are. You can see in an auction that not everybody in that room values the items being auctioned in the same way. So one person's final price point will be different from another person's, depending on their subjective valuation of the item. Now, there could be I guess, a consensus on what an item might go for. But the fact is that the value of the thing is dictated by what people are willing to pay for it. You can see this easily with extreme examples, like, for example, the price of, I don't know, water, the value of water here. You know, me sitting just outside London where water is abundant, I can just turn my tap on, is obviously worth less to me as somebody who has water in abundance than somebody dying of thirst in a desert. Someone dying of thirst in a desert in that moment may pay way over the normal odds for water. Or let's say, for example, a less extreme example, which you can see in everyday life, like, I don't know, a Manchester United shirt is obviously worth more to a die-hard Manchester United fan than to a fan of their fierce rivals, Manchester City, or to somebody who doesn't really care at all about football. So you can see that there are wildly varying valuations going on of different people looking at the same object. I guess another extreme example would be the wildly varying prices in the art world. You know, like there's a piece in the Tate Modern by Tracy Emin, which is literally just a bunch of tampons and various other items from a handbag put into a Perspex box. I imagine it took Tracy Emin less than 5 minutes to put that together. But the price of that piece, because various people in the art world think that it says something profound, is many, many more times than the labor that Emin and whoever produced the tampons originally put into it. So you can see that prices fluctuate depending on what people value. It's subjective. This is the true nature of value. It is completely subjective, and it is divorced entirely from the production process. Okay, that's the first objection. So generally, for most things, we say that supply and demand is the thing that determines the price, and the price is simply a reflection of that underlying reality. Okay, the second objection is that Marx, in Capital and in all of his writings, seems to ignore entirely the thing that is the true asset in determining value in the labor market, which is not time. It's not how much work you do in 8 hours. It's knowledge. The key value is knowledge. And I always remember this example from when I was a little kid. Okay, I can't remember, I was 10 or 11 years old. My dad is an engineer. And after a period of time, he became quite senior, and he started doing like side jobs for factories elsewhere. Okay, so not his main line of work, but just little kind of one-off side jobs to help out these other factories. And I remember he came home one day and he had a check, and the check had, I don't know, anywhere between like £500 to £1,000 on it. And he was in the factory for all of an hour. And he said to me, son, it's not, you're not paid for what you can do, you're paid for what you know. And that stuck with me. And it's basically true. He was only there an hour, but whatever knowledge that my dad brought to that scenario, brought to that factory, fixed the specific problem that they needed. And that was worth the grand that they paid him for that day. Okay. Another perfect illustration of this, and this is going to sound a bit strange, is a brilliant game that I started playing recently on Steam. You can look it up now. It's called Overcooked. It's a great game. I'd recommend playing it with like a partner, or get 2 or 3 of your mates around. And it's essentially a game where you have to cook soup or make burgers in a kitchen. Okay, and you have to do this within 3 minutes. Now the core of this game, the time always stays the same, but through cooperation and through coordination, coming up with plans, you can increase the amount of productivity that you have in the 3 or 4 minutes per level. The core of that game is in optimizing processes. It's in process management, and it's in the knowledge that you bring to the scenario, and that is the value. not what you do in the 3 minutes or how much work you do. So that in large part determined what people are paid, because with all respect, anybody can. I used to work in McDonald's. Anybody can go in there and with in 2 minutes training learn how to squirt mayonnaise on a bun or put a burger on a grill. That's not that the reason that a McDonald's job is a minimum wage job is because those people are eminently replaceable. Whereas the reason that my dad was getting paid that sort of money for his one-off side jobs is because he had a specific bit of knowledge that not everybody else has. So you can see supply and demand is the thing determining how much people are paid in the job market. The last thing I want to say is that it's important to recognize that the labor market and the market of the final product being sold are separate. Okay, every item that needs to be acquired and costed by the producer of a good is priced by the market. And again, I'll give you a tangible example. Let's say I don't know. It's my ambition to whatever it is. I want to start making watches, say. So all the processes of making I need to acquire all the bits of glass, all the cogs, whatever it is. Each of those items that I need to acquire, I acquire through their own separate markets, and each of those things are determined by the amount of people who want them and who think that that's a valuable thing to acquire, not by the amount of work that goes into them. And the final thing I'll say is that the way to see how the labor market and the final product market are completely separate is by the fact that 90% of businesses go out of business. Lots and lots of firms currently operating now are making a loss. Okay, all of that labor goes into it, and they still make a loss. Okay, so then they make less money. They're not turning a profit. And if the labor theory of value was true, then somehow these items, which had been magically imbued with value by putting labor into it, wouldn't be making a loss, would they? But they still do make a loss because like I said, the price is determined by everybody else, by what people value. It's subjective. So it doesn't matter. I could have spent 10 years working on this fantastic table, let's say. If everybody else thinks it's worthless, I can't sell it. So, there we go.
Okay, so that's 3 really large points and one piece of evidence backing up the last point. So I've tried to jot them down. Jack, I don't know if you were able to keep track of all of them, or if you kind of know how you want to go about this answering.
Well, I mean, it's going to probably take some time to discuss each of those. First of all, I just want to say that it's flatly false that no professional economist subscribes to labor theory of value. But that's not important. And he did also say that no reputable economist subscribes to it. Seems to me to be a question-begging claim, but we can overlook that as well and just talk about the first point. Now, I'm not seeing how in the first point you aren't equivocating on value there. Can you explain that to me?
How do you mean equivocating on? I'm saying that the value.
Well, it sounded like you were talking about market prices, right? But I was very careful in my introduction, and as Marx is very careful to do, right, to understand that the labor theory of value is a theory of equilibrium prices, not of market prices, right? So when you say value is subjective, from what I could tell, and I'm not very clear on what you understand value to be, but from what it sounded like to me was that you thought value was something like what people are willing to pay for a good. But that's obviously not what Marx means by value, right? So if your criticism is to say that the labor theory, your first criticism is to say the labor theory of value is mistaken because value is subjective, but then you're just equivocating on what value means. Obviously, that's not going to be an effective criticism at all, right?
Well, no, because the price is simply a reflection of lots and lots of people's different valuations of a particular product.
Yeah, but that's not answering my question. I'm asking you how you're not equivocating on value there, right? Because Marx has a very specific idea of what he understands value
Well,
to be. So if you say value is subjective, right,
yeah.
you have to mean by value what Marx means by value for that to be a valid criticism of the labor theory of value, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you agree?
Let me just define, let me just give you my understanding of what Marx means by value. Okay, it seems to me that Marx thinks that an amount of labor time put into making a certain product somehow magically imbues it with an intrinsic value, and because of that, it somehow has a kind of a set, a natural, quote unquote, price, whatever it is. And I know in Capital he spends a lot of time, doesn't he, talking about, you know, how like 2 horses are worth 1. Like he goes back to like barter, doesn't he? And my understanding of this is that, and even Ricardo and Smith, they were trying to figure out, well, if you can trade 2 oxes for 1 horse, there must be some like commonality between those 2 products for you to be able to exchange them. Am I getting this right? Tell me.
I'm not sure what you mean by intrinsic value. I mean, because Marx doesn't think that the value of a good can't change, right, over time, right? Because if you have increases of productivity of labor, right, the value of a good will actually change across time. So I'm not sure what you mean by intrinsic value, right? Well, as I said at the outset, just to clarify, right, value is something that's postulated. It's a theoretical unobservable, right, which is a familiar idea in philosophy of science, right, that if we didn't have direct evidence, if we couldn't observe directly a quark or a gluon particle, right, we could postulate such entities as explanatory hypotheses for things that we could observe, right? Because the idea is that by postulating it, it would generate specific predictions which we could observe and which could validate the explanatory hypothesis. They would confirm the explanatory hypothesis. So value is a theoretical unobservable, right? We don't observe value directly in market prices, because market prices rarely coincide with values, right? Now, the idea is that value was postulated to explain equilibrium prices. And again, equilibrium prices are rarely observed, right? What we observe are market prices where supply and demand fluctuations are causing the market price to deviate from the equilibrium price, right? So value is meant to be an explanatory hypothesis that explains equilibrium prices, not market prices. And Marx's hypothesis is that what determines the magnitude of value, right, the quantity of value, is the average quantity of unskilled labor that it takes to reproduce that good at a given time and place. Does that help clarify it?
Well, yes, but I still think that it's all, I mean, with respect, just nonsense. Let's go back.
It's fine if you think that it's nonsense. I don't have any problem with you thinking that. What I want to get from you, though, is an argument, right, that actually addresses that view, because it seems like if you say value is subjective, right?
Yeah.
It wouldn't be enough of a problem with that claim that it's merely an assertion, right? What we would actually need to be clear on is that when you say value is subjective, you're talking about the same thing that Marx is talking about.
But,
value is determined by the average quantity of unskilled labor. And see, when you were talking about value, I couldn't discern that was what that you were talking about, what Marx was talking about there. And so it didn't seem to me to be in any way a valid criticism of the theory.
Well, let's make it very simple. I like to use tangible examples because when we're talking about markets and products and people buying things, it's all in the concrete world, right? We don't need, I mean, to an extent, all of these theories are attempts to describe reality. So I like to stick with reality. So let's take this Manchester United shirt that I was talking about, okay? It seems to me that the value of the Manchester United shirt is how much a kid of like, I don't know, 17, who's an avid fan of that team, would be
Well,
prepared.
let me stop you there, though,
Yeah.
because that example is not going to work,
Oh, why
because
not?
the labor theory of value applies to a restricted set of goods that are available on the market, right? And so
All
the
right.
basic idea there is that they're freely reproducible goods that are produced by value producing labor, right? And the idea also is that those goods are not going to be things like most services, for example, right? So labor theory of value doesn't attempt to provide a theory of the prices of Rembrandt paintings, of insurance premiums, what you pay accountants, what you pay commercial artists, etc. Restricted class of commodities, right? So a more straightforward example would be something like a loaf of bread, an airplane,
Okay.
an automobile, a
So
pile of
it can't,
gold,
let's just get
or
this
oil.
right. Your theory can't do the Manchester United shirt.
It's not a theory of those types. It's not a theory. See, those, for Marx, those prices, those goods don't actually have equilibrium prices because
Right.
they're not freely reproducible goods, right? So, so what he's trying to do is offer a theory of those types of goods.
So hold on. Why isn't the Manchester United shirt a freely reproducible good? Because it's copyrighted and under intellectual property rights. Is that right?
Well, that's part of it.
Why else?
Well, I
I mean,
mean, the thing is, I don't. What is the actual product that's being sold to your mind?
well, it's obviously some fabric, probably made in China or India or somewhere.
Yeah. So if there was no copyright, right, and
Yeah.
if there was no trademark, or any kind restricting production of that good, right, then I think what we would expect is that if other producers were to enter into the production of that, right, the price of the good would basically fall to its cost of production, all other things being equal, right?
Okay.
But that's exactly what Marx's theory would say would happen.
I'm really struggling with this because I'm looking around this room and thinking that the vast majority of products that I can see around me that can be bought in real life are much more like the Manchester United shirt than the loaf of bread. So now you're saying that the labor theory of value only works for a very small amount of products.
Well, I don't think it's a small amount of products if you were to add it up. I mean, if you could figure out some way to measure, some common measure, I think we're talking about a massive amount of products. But yeah, even if it were the case that it were a small number of products, that wouldn't be a criticism of the theory, right? That wouldn't say that the theory is nonsense or false, right? Which is or emphatically wrong, as you put it, right?
Well, it does because because it seems to me that if in all those cases the value doesn't work in the same way that you're describing, and you're just kind of hand waving them and saying, "Oh, well, it doesn't work for those."
But I'm not hand waving, right? Marx says
that suggests that value doesn't work in them.
Well, I'm not hand waving, right? Marx says that what the labor theory of value is a theory of those types of goods, right? That's what he's attempting to explain the prices of, right?
Okay.
Not goods that are not freely reproducible, and basically not goods that produce. Well, we can leave aside the other the other issues because those haven't come up. So.
Okay, so let's pretend I'm a baker then. Okay, let's do it with bread since the Manchester United shirt doesn't count. Okay, so I'm a baker and I've been making a decent living just on my own. Okay, I've been running a fairly successful little bakery down the high street there, making my bread. But I'm finding that as my business has grown, I need to take on an extra member of staff because I just don't have enough time in my day to knead all the dough and, I don't know, grind the wheat down like what the bakers do. And over time, I have to hire more and more employees to take over this work because I am bogged down with the administration and the paperwork and the business side of things. So now I have workers doing this work that I once did, and they are now essentially making the bread on my behalf. I pay them a wage, and the wage I pay them is based on, I don't know, the amount of people who can knead bread in the town, let's say, who can knead dough. Tell me what happens from here in the labor theory of value.
Well, the idea is that if there's equal access to that market, right? So there aren't like rental restrictions, that give your shop some kind of privileged place where other people who are manufacturing the same good couldn't enter into the market, right, and attempt to sell the same good to the same customer. So assuming that anybody can enter that market, what we would expect on the labor theory of value is that the equilibrium price of bread in that market will be determined by the average quantity of unskilled labor that it would take to reproduce the good. That is to say, the average quantity of labor time that it takes to produce a loaf of bread, if that's the good in question. But I'm leaving aside certain complications.
But why is that?
Are not important.
Why does that determine the price and not the total amount of people who want bread?
Oh, no, the total amount of people who want bread determines the market price. Right? It doesn't determine the equilibrium price.
Okay, why don't you explain to the people watching the difference between the equilibrium price and the market price?
The equilibrium price is the average price, right? So the supply and demand, right, will push up. If you have high demand and low supply, we expect prices to rise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, if you have a large supply and low demand, we expect prices to fall, right? Now, the idea is that if supply and demand are at equilibrium, they cancel each other out, and they don't actually explain what the average price is. That has to be explained by something else, right? And that's what the labor theory of value attempts to do.
Why is this a necessary step?
Why is what a necessary step?
Why is it a necessary step to jump to the labor theory of value for the equilibrium price? This is the bit I'm not quite understand. Like,
it's just a theory of what explains equilibrium prices, right? So now somebody could offer an alternative theory of what explains equilibrium prices, and then we could use the basic procedures in the sciences to determine which is the better theory, right? But as far as I know, the subjective value theories don't actually attempt to explain equilibrium prices, right? They only attempt to explain. So I'm not sure that they are actually dealing with I'm not sure that they're actually offering any kind of scientific alternative to the labor theory of value. But even if that were the case, right, that wouldn't show that the labor theory of, even if you had an alternative theory that did that, that wouldn't show that the labor theory of value was nonsense, right, or emphatically wrong, right? You'd have to actually appeal to things like explanatory virtues. If you couldn't show that the theory was logically unsound, right, or that the theory was unfalsifiable, or that the theory was ad hoc, you'd have to actually appeal to other explanatory virtues to favor one theory over the other, right? So that would be your burden to provide if you're the one who's claiming that the theory is nonsense and emphatically wrong.
So, so the basic idea here is that because labor is a key cost that goes into this. Like, let's say I'm the baker. One of my costs is acquiring the flour. Another, what else do bakers need? Like an oven, I guess. I need to maintain the oven. But my biggest cost is going to be paying those other guys I've got in the kitchen there. Yes.
Your production costs. I mean, you're gonna have to lay out a number of things to engage in production, right? You're gonna have to lay out for presumably the buildings that house your your process of production. You're going to have to lay out for raw materials. You're going to have to lay out for energy inputs. You're going to have to lay out for auxiliary products that get consumed in the process of production, things like soap or lubricants, right? And you're going to have to lay out machinery.
Right.
To lay out for labor costs, at least for productive labor costs, right? And then presumably you have other things that you will have to pay for in order for your business to run. You're going to have to pay for accountants, insurers, advertisers, security guards, various services to what we could say services to productive capital is the way Marx would probably put it, right? So that's going to be your total. That's going to be your total in terms of expenses, right?
Yeah, no, seems to me as the baker, there's an awful lot of outlay. Can't I have my little 10% markup on the loaf of bread there? I mean, what's the point of doing it otherwise?
I don't think the markup is going to work because the point is that if the good is freely reproducible, right? Other producers are going to be able to eliminate your markup, right? By markup there, I just mean markup above value.
Yeah.
Right. So you might be able, in conditions of restricted supply, right? If you have like privileged access to some market, you might be able to mark up your goods above value. But if other people enter the market and see that you're able to earn a higher rate of profit than the average by producing that good, they're going to have an incentive to enter that market and produce the same good and try to capture some of those surplus profits, right? And so that's going to eliminate your markup.
Well, not really, because I mean, you're kind of suggesting here that it's impossible for a baker to make a profit, which is
no. The labor theory of value is a theory that there can be profit even when there's no unequal exchange, which is to say no markup, right?
Oh.
The idea behind markup is that there's unequal exchange, right? You're able to charge more than you paid for, something like that, right?
Yeah.
But Marx doesn't actually believe that the origin of profit in capitalist economies lies in unequal exchange, right? He thinks that the origin of profit comes from surplus value, right? Now, surplus value is the differential between the quantity of value that the worker produces in the workday and the value of his labor power, which is to say his wage. So the basic idea is, let's say a worker contracts to work an 8-hour day, right? And let's say that the wage for an 8-hour day is $50, right? That wage represents a certain quantity of value, $50 worth of value, right? But the worker in the workday, let's say in 4 hours, produces $50 worth of value, right? But he still works another 4 hours. And so that remaining 4 hours of the workday is something that the capitalist gets to keep, because the capitalist gets to keep the value product, right? The worker just contracts to work for 8 hours, and the capitalist gets to keep whatever the worker produces and then sell it, right? Now, if the worker has produced twice as much value as the value of his labor power, if the capitalist is able to sell that good at its value, right, he gets to pocket the surplus value. And that's the source of profit for Marx. So there doesn't have to be any unequal exchange for there to be profit for Marx, right? Unlike in subjective value theories, where the idea is that if every good was exchanged equivalent for equivalent, right, there could be no profit, right? It's profit only comes about through unequal exchange on subjective value theories, right? That's not Marx's view.
No, okay. But on Marx's own terms, I do have a lot of questions, and I've always had these questions of this. So I'm the baker, okay. You just went through all of my costs on top of the wage I'm paying this skivvy in the kitchen, okay. It's not true, is it, that the worker in the kitchen produced all of that value? The value was produced. The product.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so you're right. Well, okay. So let's clarify that. So, as far as things like capital inputs, right? So, fixed capital assets like buildings and machinery, and tools that are not used up in the production process, in a single circuit of the production process, versus other capital goods such as raw materials and energy inputs and other auxiliary products. Those are understood by Marx to contribute to the value of the good, right? But he thinks that all of those inputs are themselves decomposable into quantities of labor time, right? So there's an average quantity of labor time that it takes to produce a building, that it takes to produce an oven, that it takes to produce flour, and so on, right? So that's going to contribute to the final value of the baked, the finished loaf of bread that goes to sale on the market, right? That the bakery produces. That's going to make up a portion. Those capital, the price of those capital inputs, is going to make up a portion. Well, I guess I should say the value of those capital inputs is going to make up a portion of the total value of the finished product, right? And then obviously something is added to that on Marx's view. Something is added to that by the labor that the laborer performs on those raw materials those machines.
This is totally incorrect, though, isn't it? Like, let's say I'm a baker, okay, and I've got like the bog standard red brick oven. That can churn out, I don't know, 10 baguettes an hour, okay, with my man there on £50 a day, putting in the baguettes, getting out 8 an hour, okay. Baker down the road has just got the super bake oven 10,000 that can do 100 baguettes an hour. Okay, I'm going to want to get a better machine than him so I can outcompete him. And the value of the oven comes from how much I want to beat that guy. It doesn't come from the labor that went into the oven.
You mean what you're willing to pay for that oven? Is that what you mean by value?
What I'm willing to pay is an expression of how much I value.
Yeah, but the labor theory of value isn't a theory of what you're willing to pay, right? It's a theory of what the equilibrium price of the oven is going to be, right? So that wouldn't be an argument against the claim that Marx would make, right?
But who cares about that? I'm talking about, I'm a baker. I don't give a shit about Marx. I want that oven, okay?
Well, you presumably are going to want to pay less for the oven, right? Than you want to pay as little as possible for the oven.
I want to pay as little as possible, but I want it more than that guy. And if it's between me and him, I'll pay more. I'll bid more.
Yeah, but the fact that you're willing to pay more because you have some So, but why would you have to pay more? I'm not understanding. If you had access to a free market, right, you'd only have to pay the average price, right? I guess if there were a shortage of ovens on the market, you're saying you'd have to pay higher than the average price, right?
Right.
So, and you'd be willing to, but that's perfectly fine. Marx isn't
Right.
saying that people aren't willing to pay more than the average price. He's just saying that what determines the average price is the quantity of labor time, right? So I'm not seeing how that's an objection to the theory.
because the value of that oven that I'm buying that makes 100 baguettes an hour could have taken the company the same as it takes the company who made the red brick oven. It's just that one is
no,
worth
I think you're misunderstanding. So it's not the price that the capitalist has paid for the oven that determines the value, right? Or that contributes to the value of the loaf of bread. It's the value of that capital input that contributes to the value, right? So you might have paid $100,000 for an oven that the equilibrium price of is, let's say, $10,000, right? That's not going to make your bread more valuable. The fact that you paid $100,000, right? It's going to be the average price of the oven, the $10,000, that's going to be contributing to the value of the finished loaf of bread in that market.
The thing I'm not understanding here is that it could take, like, let's say the red brick oven I've got already took 4 hours to make by Oven Manufacturers Inc. And the 10,000 and the super duper one also took 4 hours to make. The fact that one is a lot better than the other and I'm willing to pay more for it isn't based on the amount of time it took them to make the thing. I mean, I don't understand why the time is an element, because it obviously isn't. Like, I'm a baker.
If you maybe this will help clear this up. So
Okay.
if you were to acquire a piece of labor-saving technology, right? Let's say you were willing to pay more for some souped-up oven, right?
Right.
That would reduce the amount of workers that you needed to employ in order to make the same amount of bread, right? Now, presumably, that would only be to your advantage to do if it reduced your total costs, right?
Right.
Yeah. So the idea is that you would end up paying less in total because you'd be saving on labor costs, and presumably you'd be saving more on labor costs than you would be paying in the extra outlay for the more expensive machine, right?
But now you're making a different argument. Now you're saying that because yes, the value of the oven is, to me, that it can produce more an hour, and possibly means I have to pay fewer workers to do it.
But what that's going to allow you to do is to actually produce loaves of bread at a lower cost of production than your competitors, right?
But do you see what I'm saying? Is that no part of that has anything to do with the amount of time it took to make the oven in the first place. It's to do with what I can do with it. It's because I want it to use it.
Well, no. But the thing is, we need to distinguish, again, what we're trying to explain is not the amount of money that you make when you sell a loaf of bread, right? But what determines the average price of bread. Now, see, the thing is that if you're able to produce bread at a lower cost of production to your competitors, right? That is going to incentivize your competitors to adopt the same labor-saving technology that you've adopted, right? And so what I'm saying is, or what Marx is saying is that once that labor-saving technology becomes generalized in that sector of production, then the value of a loaf of bread will fall.
but like yes, it will. The value of the price of bread will fall, but it's never going to reach this equilibrium. It's never going to reach this point that you're talking about, because all that will happen then is that some bright spark will come up with the super duper duper oven.
Well, I don't, what point did you think I was talking about? All I was saying was that you can gain a short-term advantage in the market against your competitors, right? Vis-a-vis your competitors, you can gain a short-term advantage over them by adopting labor-saving technology that they haven't adopted yet, right? Because you can then produce a good such as loaf of bread at a lower cost of production than your competitors, right? And so you can earn higher profits, you can outprice them in the market, et cetera, et cetera. Now, all I'm saying is that once your competitors have all adopted that labor-saving technology, right, which is going to increase the productivity of labor generally throughout that sector of production, right, allow you to produce more bread per hour for fewer workers and fewer production costs, that's going to cause the equilibrium price of a loaf of bread to go down, all other things being equal, right? So I'm not sure what you're disagreeing with there.
But I don't disagree with it that the price of bread will go down. I just disagree that it's got anything to do with the amount. I disagree that it's got anything to do with what you're calling labor time. So you think the thing that is creating value here is the fact that I'm pumping out like 100 bread per hour as opposed to 10 bread per hour. Is this basically what it boils down to?
It's the quantity. So remember that the value of a good on the theory is determined by the average quantity of unskilled labor that it takes to, average quantity of unskilled labor time that it takes to reproduce that good at a given time and place. But the way that that's computed, right, is that you have to take into account the capital inputs, which are measured in quantities of labor time, right, as themselves contributing to the value, right? So the capital inputs, right, what you pay for in machines, machinery, buildings, raw materials, energy inputs, auxiliary products, etc., right? That contributes to a portion of the value of the finished good. The additional quantity of labor that the labor performs on those raw materials with that machinery and with those tools, right, contributes something to the final value product. Yes.
So in this calculation, is my super bread oven that I've bought worth the 4.5 labor time that it took to make it in the first place, or is it worth, I don't know, the 10,000 labor time and whatever that it could potentially produce for me over the next year?
I think the basic idea is that in general, right, labor-saving technology is going to be more expensive, right? That the souped-up machine, the machine that allows you to dispense with workers, is probably going to be require more work to produce, right? I think that's generally the case. I mean, sometimes people discover ways of developing machines that are more efficient, that might be cheaper, right? But I think in general, it's a higher cost of production to acquire the better machine that's more efficient, right? And presumably, if you're a rational capitalist, as I mentioned before, the only reason you would have to do that is if you thought you could save money in the long run, right, by having to employ fewer workers. So the idea is that the amount of money that you save in letting go of extra workers makes up for the extra costs that you are paying out to buy the more expensive machine, right? So it will be worth it once you've paid off the machine, right? You'll be earning. I mean, until your competitors have caught up with you, you'll be earning a higher rate of profit per production cycle.
So when you do this calculation, it's not the amount of time that went into making the machine that you've bought. It's the amount.
No. What determines the amount? What determines the average price? That is, say, the equilibrium price of the expensive machine, the more expensive labor-saving machine, is going to be the quantity of labor time that it takes to produce that machine. That's the reason why it's more expensive.
So going back to our scenario, you're saying that when I said my old red brick oven took 4.5 hours to make, and the new super duper one took 4.5 hours to make, you're saying that in reality that doesn't happen, that the super duper oven
that could happen. That could happen. But the point is that if you adopted a new technology that cost the same as your old technology, but was more efficient with respect to labor, right? The reason why you would earn a higher profit in the short term is because you were employing further laborers with that same technology. And once that technology becomes generalized, the value of the good will go down because, again, the cost of productions is lowered because you've gotten rid, even with the same capital outlay for constant capital constant capital inputs, even though that's the same as it was before, your outlay for labor is going to be smaller. So you've reduced your cost of production. That's going to cause your value to go down. Value of the finished good to go down.
Yeah, yes, but I mean, you still have to work in the real world where supply and demand are constant factors. And
but the theory doesn't contradict supply and demand, right? It's just saying that supply and demand doesn't explain the equilibrium price. It will explain the market prices, right? It will explain why the market prices can be higher or lower than the equilibrium price. So none of that is being contradicted by the theory.
So what is the point? Because given that in the real world the equilibrium price is basically never reached, what is the point of this? What is the point of pointing this out? What's the ultimate end game?
The idea, as I said at the outset, was that Marx believed that with the labor theory of value, he could discover the laws of motion of the capitalist mode of production, which is to say, essentially a set of macroeconomic trends that would describe capitalist economies in the long run. That's the basic idea behind the theory.
But it only works for a certain subset of items, which didn't include a lot of the ones I listed.
No. The labor theory of value is a theory that understands only a restricted set of goods as being described as being explained by that theory. But the point is that with that theory, you can actually predict trends with respect to the entire capitalist economy across time.
So I guess the obvious question is that Marx was writing in the 1850s, 1860. He was a man who never worked, as far as we know. He had a friend, Engels, who was the son of a factory owner, but Marx himself never worked in that factory. He was essentially a man trying to look at factories and, you know, the Industrial Revolution era London and figure all of this stuff out about production and so on. Okay, despite having never been involved in any of these industries, he just came up with these theories that we've been trying to make sense of today. Now, obviously, in his world, there were a lot of items that were reproducible, like bread that we've been talking about. But now in 2017, when I look at the real economy and I look at all of the things that drive, especially Western economies, it feels to me that the vast majority of items on the market are more like the Manchester United shirt than they are like bread. I mean, even when you think of the big companies out there, like your Microsoft and Google and digital marketing and PR and all of these other industries that don't seem to be accounted for in the labor theory of value, these all form a real...
I should clarify. So the labor theory of value doesn't attempt to give a theoretical account of what determines the prices of those types of goods, right? It doesn't attempt to theorize why a Rembrandt painting sells for $100 million, why a Manchester United shirt sells for much more than it would if there was no trademark, right? And so forth. But that doesn't mean that that the labor theory of value doesn't generate certain predictive expectations with respect to the economy as a whole across time, right? So it wouldn't matter that, let's say for the sake of argument, that the quantity of goods that are specifically explained by the labor theory of value, right, if we could figure out some way to measure that, has declined as a proportion of the total goods produced in the world economy, right, over the intervening 150 years, right? Even if that were the case, it doesn't follow that the predictions that the theory makes about capitalist economies as a whole would cease to be operative.
Can I, because I still don't have a sense of what counts and what doesn't count. Can I go through some real life items just for people like
Sure.
watching to? Okay, so the Manchester United shirt doesn't count. How about
Well, I mean, I think you could say that you could say that to a limited extent, the labor theory of value explains Manchester United shirts, right? Because it might be a shirt that is pretty much like some standard order shirt that anybody could make, right? And so you might say that that's going to determine the average cost of production, but that the good is always going to sell far above what its value would be because of a monopoly element in the pricing, right? So I wouldn't say it's totally outside the purview of the labor theory of value. It's just the point is that it's not technically a truly freely reproducible good because nobody else can sell a Manchester, or at least legally, can sell a Manchester United shirt or jersey, whatever it is.
Okay.
So there's going to be a monopoly element to pricing, right? And obviously monopoly elements in pricing will distort prices. That's the same thing like supply and demand.
They don't have a monopoly, do they? They have they're in competition with all the other football team shirts.
No, but what they have a monopoly on production of that type of shirt, right?
Okay.
Nobody else can produce that type of shirt, right? I assume it's illegal to do that, right?
And this is what I'm getting at. So like nobody else legally can produce a can of Coke apart from Coca-Cola.
That's right.
So do they not count as well because of
well,
the
again,
IP?
I'm just saying that there can be distortions in the pricing, which is to say deviations from value caused by monopoly pricing, right? So that just means that we shouldn't expect.
Hold on a sec, because I can't allow this because you're really, a monopoly is when you have I guess a market with a single producer. Okay, you can't redefine monopoly to mean only Coke is allowed to make cans of Coca-Cola.
But that is a monopoly. They have a monopoly on Coke production, Coca-Cola production, right?
Yeah, well, they have a, yeah, but that's like saying I'm the baker and I've
well, look,
got,
it wouldn't mean anything. It wouldn't mean anything at all, right? If people didn't think there was a difference, right? Because Coke has a special formula, right? It has like some kind of secret formula, and so people say that it tastes different from Pepsi or RC Cola or whatever, right? So that's the reason why it matters. Now, there are some goods where there'll be a different trademark on the good, right? Yeah. But it's not going to actually make a difference to consumers because they'll say it's just the same good. It just has a different company that produces it. But for all intents and purposes, it has what Marx would call the same use value, right? In those cases, we wouldn't say there was a monopoly.
I don't understand, because this obviously happens with every single product, right? There's different brands of bread. Some people might love Hovis, and other people, I don't know what your American brands of bread are, but there are different, and there are people who, swear by a certain type of bread. I like this one, it tastes nice.
Well, that will allow the pricing to be distorted by that element, right? That's all that I'm saying. I mean, that I don't see that I'm saying anything particularly controversial there, right? It's just like take a drug, right? Now, when a drug is under patent, in the period that it's under patent, right, people have to pay this higher amount, right? Because the drug company can charge more than its cost of production, much more than its cost of production, because it's granted a limited monopoly in time. That good. But once the patent expires, right, people are going to be able to enter that market. And that's going to, if consumers don't see that there's any difference between who is producing the good and they're just looking for the cheapest price that's available, everybody is going to converge on the same set of prices under those conditions, right? And that price, Marx is going to say, going to be determined by the average quantity of unskilled labor time that it takes to reproduce that good, right? It's just going to fall to its value, right? So it's the same thing with Coca-Cola. If Coca-Cola's secret formula, right, was to suddenly be no longer allowed to be secret and anybody else could produce Coke, and let's say Coke was earning a higher rate of profit than Pepsi because people preferred Coke to Pepsi, and they were willing to pay more for Coke, even though Coke cost just as much to produce as Pepsi cost to produce, right? Nonetheless, Coca-Cola was able to charge more because people preferred the taste of Coke. Well, if Pepsi could then enter the market and produce a Coke facsimile, right, we would expect Coca-Cola prices to fall under those conditions. I think that's exactly what happens. I don't think I'm saying anything that's proprietary to Marx there. I think any mainstream economist would agree with that analysis.
Okay. So it seems to me that the value, like since we're talking about real world examples, that the value of the Coca-Cola can isn't coming, like it's not really coming from the labor time that whoever produced the liquid, the unskilled laborers who went into whatever they do in a Coke bottling factory. It seems like the value is also coming from all of the people who, obvious part of it is coming from the person who made the original recipe, which I saw in Atlanta.
But could he continue to charge more for having made it if it was not under patent or trademark?
Well, it's a very interesting example, because in real life, Coke was the most heavily copied product around. There was all sorts of knockoff Cokes,
and that presumably pushed the price of Coke down considerably. Right?
It pushed it down, but then when I forget his name, but with the original guy who came up with the recipe, he basically was forced to sell to a venture capitalist group, and I guess died in fairly ignominious circumstances, i.e. he no longer owned the rights to the company. Where Coke really differentiated themselves, they were in this market with all these different copycats, with all these different other cola companies, Jack's Cola, all of these, and their innovation was in branding. It was in
but that's not
advertising.
That's not contradicting anything that I'm saying, right? I'm granting that branding, right, can allow for people to charge more for a good than they would be able to otherwise, right? But
right.
What that is but that's only possible under conditions, under monopoly conditions, right? If the Coke trademark was not licensed to Coca-Cola alone, right? Anybody could produce a Coca-Cola facsimile.
But this is what I'm saying, that they did this at a time before IP, when they were able to, they had to, because of all these facsimiles, because of all these copycats, they had to make themselves stand out by saying it's the real thing. This is the actual Coke, the real one. You know that you'll get it when you buy this.
Now let me ask you something. Do you think that if they were earning higher significantly higher than average rates of profit in doing that. That if somebody could legally make an exact replica of those cans of Coke, they wouldn't have had an incentive to do that.
Of course. I mean,
and what would happen? What would you expect to happen under those conditions? Wouldn't you expect the price of Coke to fall?
But this is only to do with supply and demand, isn't it? You're increasing the supply of a certain thing.
What I'm saying is that if you have restricted access to a good, right, to production of a good, that can push up the price of that good. So monopolies, right, which is what trademarks and patents and copyrights are, right? Monopolies are features of the economy that allow goods to be sold above value. And what I'm saying is, once that restricted access to production is eliminated, that will mean that that monopoly price, right, that added price will fall, and the price will fall, the average market price will fall to its equilibrium price, which is to say its value, right? That's all that I'm saying, but I don't think there's anything controversial about that. That's not something proprietary to Marx. That's something any mainstream economist would agree to.
But this is not an issue, is it? Because you know, one of the reasons that I am so for free market capitalism is the tendency of prices to come down. It's because when you have competition between, my favorite example is the can of corn.
But Marx isn't saying that capitalism won't cause the prices of goods to fall over time, right? He's saying precisely that it will cause the prices of goods to fall over time.
But why is that bad? As a consumer, that's excellent.
He's not saying that that's bad.
So what's the issue? What's the...
The issue is that he doesn't think that capitalism can be sustained in the long run, right? He thinks that it's a mode of production that ultimately will break down, will, you know, find itself mired in crises that it ultimately cannot resolve, and that it's not possible to reform capitalism in such a way to avert those crises or resolve them, right? But that's something that he concludes from the labor theory of value. He's saying that the labor theory of value, if we look closely at what its logical implications are, right, that is what we should expect capitalist economies to, but it's not how we should expect them to end up.
It's right? Just not true. It's just not true, is it? Because you're assuming through all of this that supply and demand are constants and that equilibrium is going to be reached. That's not true, though, is it? Because
where did I assume that supply and demand are?
Well, because you've been talking about equilibrium prices, which is when
equilibrium prices are just what the if we were to actually plot out the market prices on a graph, right, they're what would be the basic axis of prices that we could draw and see the oscillations oscillating around, right? We can see the supply and demand. We can see the market prices oscillating around that axis, right? So it's a theoretical entity, an equilibrium price, right? We don't observe equilibrium prices. We observe market prices, except in the rare cases where prices coincide with equilibrium prices. What we observe are market prices, but nonetheless, there's something that we can discern in the fluctuations of market prices, which is an equilibrium price. And so for Marx and for Smith and for Ricardo, right, the task of economic science was to offer an explanation to that.
But where I was going with this is that why I wanted to list a pile of items. Coke was just the first one, and we got off on a tangent. But where I wanted to go with this is that why should we care about this? Like you just outruled.
Well, again, the reason why we should care about it is that if the labor theory of value is a correct scientific theory, right, what it predicts is that capitalism can't be sustained in the long run. And if we're interested in preserving human civilization, we have to abolish capitalism and replace it with something that can endure in the long run. That's the reason why Marx was interested in it. And I take it that's the reason why most Marxist economists are interested in the theory.
But a pile of stuff
They
in
think
our
it makes a big
a
difference.
pile of stuff in our economy doesn't count as soon as you introduce intellectual property or branding.
It's not a question of not counting, right? It's saying that if we start from looking at a restricted set of goods and try to theorize what their equilibrium price, what explains their equilibrium prices, we can then generate certain predictions from that theory, right? Which will apply to the entire capitalist economy, to the world economy, right? As a whole, over time. And so it's simply a question of whether that, if that theory is correct, if it's empirically confirmed, right, then we have reason to take seriously what the theory predicts.
Okay. But I mean, you still haven't, in my mind, you still haven't dealt with the fact that this is just not how the world works. I mean, it's.
Well, that's an assertion. So you'd have to give me an argument to show what exactly shows that the theory is false or mistaken, right? I mean, you could show that there's some logical.
Because you keep on saying that the price point of something is not its value, and I'm saying that they're essentially synonymous. How much I value something.
Well, when you say that they're synonymous, it just sounds like you're equivocating on value there.
But I don't understand why I should take this man from the mid-19th century's definition of value as being something that I should care about. I can't, like,
well,
if
again,
I want some, if I
it's just
want
like
something,
in any other science, right? If somebody comes up with electrons or gluons or quarks, right? We're interested. There's no reason to be interested in somebody's speculation.
But it's disprovable by going to any fucking auction anywhere in the world.
So you'd have to explain to me how an
or
auction
any marketplace.
You'd have to explain to me how an auction disproves labor theory of value, because I'm not seeing that.
Okay, all right. The three of us walk into an auction. Okay, I'm a collector of Pokemon cards. You're a collector of, I don't know, books on Marxism. Okay.
So those are not freely reproducible goods, right?
Oh, right. Oh, okay. So they don't work.
So that doesn't disprove the theory.
I'm a lover of bread, and you're allergic to gluten, and the thing on auction is stacks of bread.
What would well, wait, people don't auction bread, do they?
It doesn't matter, because we're dealing with theory now. Okay, in the auction.
But a market is an auction, right? Is essentially an auction, right?
Right.
So we can just look at bread in a market. We don't have to imagine an auction. Now, how does the fact that some people are allergic to gluten, right, and therefore are less willing to pay for a loaf of bread than a person who's not allergic to gluten is willing to pay for a loaf of bread, how does that disprove the labor theory of value? Because that's just going to be a difference of supply and demand. Right? That just means some people are going to be less willing to pay to buy bread at its value, which is to say at its equilibrium price.
It's nonsense.
Well, again, saying it's nonsense isn't an
rubbish.
Argument.
It just comes down to how
saying
much.
It's rubbish is not an argument.
Just be quiet a second, okay? It doesn't matter. Just be quiet a second. It doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't matter how much time went into making the bread, okay? All that matters is how much I'm prepared to pay for the bread today, and how much
you're talking about market prices there, but that's
because
not what the theory
is value, for fuck's sake. That is
that
value.
Just sounds like you're equivocating on value.
I'm not equivocating, for fuck's sake.
Okay,
I'm not equivocating on value.
So then
value is subjective. Value is subjective.
And is that what Marx means by value? When
I don't give a fuck what Marx.
So then you're just using the term.
Marx
so you're just using the term value to mean something different from what Marx means.
I don't give a shit what Marx thinks about that. This is how value works in the real world.
Again, when you say this is how value works in the real world.
Go on eBay right now, and you can see.
Again, when you say this is how value works in the real world, do you mean by value the same thing that the labor theory of value means by value, or do you mean something else? Because if you mean something else, you are not addressing the theory.
I mean,
not
how much people
criticizing the
want
theory.
how much people want something as
That
as an
determines the
expression of
market
their
price,
value.
right? That determines the market price, right? Now, how many times have we gone over the fact that the labor theory of value is not a theory of market prices?
So what does it explain? What does it explain?
It explains equilibrium prices. Do you deny that there are such things?
In the real world, they are very seldom reached, if ever.
What difference does that make?
Because we are talking about the real world, a description of reality.
Equilibrium prices are part of reality, right? They're just not observed.
All right.
Right? Gluons are part of reality, presumably. So are quarks, right? So are electrons, right? Presumably we don't observe those things directly. We postulate them as theoretical, as a type of theoretical explanons, right? In order to explain other things, right? So the idea of value is exactly like that. We posit value in order to explain other things. That is, to explain the laws of motion of the capitalist economy as a whole.
The laws
right?
of motion of the capitalist economy as a whole is that people want stuff and they try to buy it, and that fluctuates over time. So when you look back in history, there have been different products in vogue at different times. Okay, the reason why some markets rise and other markets fall is because products come and go and people want them. Think of the yo-yo in the schoolyard.
Well, that's not contradicting the labor theory of value. Right? Well, labor theory of value isn't saying that that isn't true, right? So adducing that as some kind of evidence that the labor theory of value is false or mistaken, right, is just not to the point at all. You need to show. Let me try to explain to you, right? Let me try to explain to you how you can criticize a scientific theory. There's only a few options available to you, right? You can show that there's a contradiction in the theory, right?
No, I'm not having this debate on your terms. I'm not having this debate on your terms.
Well, wait a minute. So do we disagree? Do we disagree about what makes a scientific theory a good theory? Because if you want to dispute that, we can dispute that, right? I don't think what I'm saying about what makes a scientific theory a good theory is particularly controversial. It's not proprietary to Marxists, right? I think pretty much anybody, will accept what I have to say makes a scientific theory a good scientific theory. But if you want to dispute my criteria, we can have that discussion.
I'm saying that this definition of value that you've been going through isn't correct, and it's falsifiable just by looking at the real world and how prices work.
Well, you haven't yet shown.
There is no difference between the value and the market price. The price is a reflection of my value.
When you say there's no difference between a value and the market price, are you using value to mean the same thing that the labor theory of value means by value, or you mean something different?
I don't care, because
if you don't care, how is that supposed to be taken seriously as a criticism of the theory when you aren't even addressing what the theory claims?
Because the theory gets the nature of value wrong. Because
again, do you mean by value the same thing that the labor theory of value means by value then?
It seems to me that the labor theory of value is just saying that value is the production costs.
It's not saying that.
Okay, how is it not?
It's saying that there is a theoretical unobservable, which we can call value, right, which the theory calls value, right, which will coincide with equilibrium price under certain restricted conditions. And it's saying that what determines the magnitude of value, the quantity of value, what determines that is the average quantity of unskilled labor time that it takes to reproduce that good at a given time and place. That's what the theory says, right?
Mm-hmm. But that's not true, is it?
Well, in order to show that, that's why, see, when you say that that's not true, that's why it's important to have a discussion about how we disprove scientific theories, right? And I was offering you a list of criteria by which you could attempt to do that, right? You could say, you could A, show that the theory is logically self-contradictory. B, you could show that the theory was unfalsifiable, right? you could show that the theory was ad hoc, right? Or 4, you could show that the predictions that the theory makes have been empirically falsified, right? You haven't done any of those things. Now, if you'd like to do one of those things and you're successful in your argument, you'll have shown that there's a problem with the theory or that the theory is false. I invite you to do that.
Let's move on to my second point, okay? Because I don't think we're going to agree on this. All I've done is point to reality and say the world doesn't work like this. If that doesn't falsify your theory, I don't know what else does.
Well, but in order to say that the world doesn't work like this, right, you'd have to show me how a specific prediction that the theory generates has been empirically falsified. And you haven't done that. That's what your task would have to do in order for your first point to go through. But you just keep equivocating on value.
Yeah, because it's a fundamental thing. I will not agree that value is produced in the way that you're saying.
You can say that you don't agree with the theory, right? Now, when somebody doesn't agree with a theory, what they do is A, show that the theory is logically self-contradictory, right? Or B, show that the theory is empirically falsified.
I've said that value doesn't work in the way that you have defined it.
That's
you get
just
value
an assertion.
wrong.
What I've
it's
asked
just
you to
wrong
do,
out of the gate.
Again, you just keep repeating the assertion. What I'm asking you to do, right, to show that the theory is false, is to show me a specific prediction that the theory makes and show me empirical evidence that that theory is false. You haven't done that. That prediction is false, rather.
Okay, so right. So you want me to come up with empirical evidence that value doesn't work in the way that you
if you don't have a logical objection to the theory, if your objection to the theory is not that it's empirically unfalsifiable, if your objection to the theory is not that it's an ad hoc theory, right, then presumably your objection must be something like that the predictions generated by the theory have been proven false, right? So you'd have to show me a specific prediction that's generated by the theory and show me the evidence that that prediction has not come true, right?
Okay, so do bread manufacturers fail to make money in 2017?
That's not a prediction of the theory, so that wouldn't be material.
So what was the prediction of the theory that it would come down to the point where capitalism has broken down? Has that happened in 2017?
Well, it doesn't say that the capitalism should break down by 2017. So that wouldn't be relevant either.
So when does it break down by then?
I don't know.
Oh, right. Okay. So now you're just kind of making random. You're basically saying
you're misunderstanding. You're misunderstanding the dialectic here, right? Your claim.
I think we have to move on. I think we have to move on to.
Well, I want to make this point, even if you don't want to respond to it, right? Just so people are not under any illusions about what's happened here, right? Your claim at the outset is that the theory is nonsense and that the theory is wrong, right? That's your claim, right? Now, I've adduced the criteria by which you could show that to be the case. You could, A, demonstrate some kind of logical contradiction in the theory. You haven't done that. B, you could show that the theory is unfalsifiable.
I've said that value is not produced by the labor time.
That's just a claim. And again, every time I've tried to address that claim, I've asked you if by value you mean the same thing that the labor theory of value means by value, or whether you're equivocating, right? And at no time has it been clear that what you mean by value is what the theory means by value. And as I said over and over again, until you actually address the theory itself, rather than a straw man, right, it's going to be immaterial that that's your criticism.
So you want me to say that the equilibrium price is, you're claiming that the equilibrium price is a reflection of labor value, that the labor time produces that, and that is, okay, and you want me to somehow, on your own terms, using your definition of value, falsify that?
Well, what I'm asking you to falsify is the theory, right? So what that means is that
this is like trying to argue that God doesn't exist against Thomas Aquinas. This is what this is.
Why?
Because you're starting with the premise, and then you're basically straitjacketing me to use your terms, to use your theoretical framework,
My
to try to
terms,
falsify why God doesn't exist.
Isn't it? No,
This
excuse
is
no, I'm sorry.
This is
It's not like
Aquinas.
that.
This is
It's not
Aquinas.
like that at all.
It is. It's a fucking
Because what I'm
Aquinas.
saying is, just like any other scientific theory, right? The labor theory of value is a theory that makes predictions, so therefore is a falsifiable theory, A. B, it makes predictions of novel facts, so it is not an ad hoc theory. And C, those predictions are empirically verifiable.
Right.
That's just like any other scientific theory, right?
Right.
So if your
and my answer
claim,
is go on to
if
eBay
your
and you will see
claim-
that it predicts everything incorrectly.
great. So you need to show then how a specific prediction that the theory makes, show how the theory makes that prediction, and then show me an example from eBay that shows how that's false. You haven't done that. You've just made the claim. I'm not interested in your claims, right? Your claim at the outset has been
Okay.
that the theory is wrong, right?
I'd like to
have an
switch.
argument for that.
I am not going to keep on going down this cul-de-sac. Okay, a loaf of bread is 70p in the shops. Okay, have a look at the price of a loaf of bread 10 years ago. You'll find that it probably has remained pretty steady.
And how is that a contradiction of the labor theory of value?
Well, how it's as I understand.
I don't see the relevance of any of that unless it somehow shows that the labor theory of value is false.
As I understand the prediction, the price of bread is going to reach a point where it's going to somehow cause capitalism to collapse. Is that not the claim?
It has nothing to do with the price of bread.
Oh, it's not. So what's it to do with the price of then? If it's not to do with the price of bread, what is to do with the price?
It has to do with it. The reason why capitalism will break down.
Why will capitalism break down? And like
that's not easy. That's not easy to explain. I mean, the basic idea.
You're asking me to empirically prove your fucking bonkers theory, and now you're telling me hard to explain.
You keep saying that it's bonkers, but you haven't been able to offer a single argument against the theory.
I'm asking you to point. I'm asking you. It's up to you to prove the fucking claim.
No. You're not understanding.
No, right. It's not.
Okay.
You
said at the out. I can prove the theory.
We have to.
If necessary.
We have to stop.
That's fine. Before we stop, though, I'm just going to make an observation, right? Because it seems to me you've misunderstood the dialectic. When we entered into this discussion, I pointed out at the beginning, right, that you claimed that the theory was emphatically wrong, and at numerous points in the discussion, you've said the theory was nonsense, the theory was bonkers, et cetera, right?
Yep.
So your claim is that the theory is false. Now, what I've asked you to do from the outset, right, is to give me an argument that establishes that claim. Because for the life of me, I haven't seen you provide even a scintilla of support.
Because I don't even understand.
You did not even know what the theory is, and you said the theory was nonsense. When people say that a theory is nonsense, and they don't know anything about the theory,
Jack,
that's just intellectual dishonesty.
No, it's not, because I have read.
So you do know what the theory is.
I have read all 3 fucking volumes of Capital.
No, you haven't.
Why
are you lying?
I have. I've written books on.
Tell me.
Okay.
Tell me if you've read all 3 volumes of Capital, right? Tell me what CV and S stand for.
Jack.
Tell me what CV and S stand for if you've read all 3 volumes of Capital. What do those initials mean in the labor theory of value?
Jack, please.
You're a liar. Now, why would you lie?
Jack, I want you.
You don't even know. You've never read the fucking book.
I have read the book. Okay.
What does CV and S mean?
I've not.
What does CV and S mean?
I can't bloody remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, you can't remember. So you don't fucking know what the theory is.
But
okay. The point is, if you're going to say the theory is false, you have to provide an argument that the theory is false.
You have to.
Okay. What is the argument?
In order for me to provide empirical evidence against this theory, which, as far as I'm concerned, is rubbish, you need to give me some sort of empirical evidence for it being true.
Rubbish, right? When you say, as far as it's concerned, it's rubbish, right? In order for that to be a justified claim, you'd have to know what the theory is. Right, you'd have to know what predictions the theory makes. So if you don't know, excuse me,
My
if
God.
you don't know what the theory predicts, then the intellectually honest position is to say, I actually don't understand the theory, and I don't know whether it's true or false. Right?
Jack.
But that's not actually what you said in this discussion at any point, right?
This is
say
fucking nonsense.
you didn't say I'm agnostic about the labor theory of value. You didn't say the labor theory of value has not been proven to me to my satisfaction, right? You've emphatically said, right? You used the word emphatically. You said it's emphatically wrong. It's bonkers. It's nonsense. Now, the only way that could be a justified claim is if you had an argument to disprove the theory. And again, I adduced the criteria by which argument. You could show a logical contradiction in the theory. You failed to do that. You could show that the theory was unfalsifiable. You failed to do that. I'll be finished in a second. You could show that the theory was ad hoc. You failed to do that. Or you could show that a specific prediction that the theory makes has been empirically falsified. But you don't even know what predictions the theory makes, right? And yet, nonetheless, you continue to insist that it's nonsense.
Jack,
now, I'm asking you to be intellectually honest about it.
I asked you, first of all, you have to be quiet, okay? Secondly, I asked you, what does the theory predict? I said, as far as I understand it, his theory predicts that capitalism breaks down eventually. And that hasn't happened in 2017. I asked you, when is it going to happen? And you said, I don't know. You asked me for empirical evidence based on the price of a loaf of bread. I asked you for empirical evidence to show how the theory is working now in 2017 based on the price of bread. You said, what's the price of bread got to do with anything? So the burden of proof is on you to demonstrate with empirical evidence why the theory is working. If capitalism isn't breaking down, or if the price of bread hasn't crashed through the floor, then it seems to me that you haven't proved anything empirically.
I never claimed to have proven it. You're the one who made the claim that the theory was nonsense and bonkers. Now, do we disagree that in order for that to be a justified claim, you'd have to actually have evidence that the theory was false, rather than be agnostic and say, I haven't been persuaded of the theory, right? Because that's not been your claim. Your claim has not been, I'm not persuaded of the theory. No one has presented to me a credible case, right? That would be a very different claim. But that's not the claim that you made. The claim that you've made from the outset and that you've reiterated from the outset, right, is that the theory is emphatically wrong, it's nonsense, and it's bonkers. Now, all I'm asking you is, do you have justification for that claim? Because if you don't have justification for that claim,
I have.
If you don't have justification for that claim,
incorrect, Jack. The definition
again, that's an assertion. That's an assertion, right? And I've asked you
not because
numerous times,
I've gone
if
through.
By value you mean the same thing that the labor theory of value means by the term value. Because if not, right, that assertion is immaterial to criticism of the theory.
It hasn't happened, though, is it, Jack? It hasn't happened.
What hasn't happened?
What you're talking about hasn't happened, and I'm
what
asking
hasn't happened?
The prediction hasn't happened, Jack.
What prediction?
The prediction that capitalism will eventually collapse because of all.
Does the theory predict that capitalism should have collapsed by 2017?
Well, you tell me. You're the one putting it forward.
No. You're the one who's saying that the theory is bonkers and the theory is wrong.
When is it going to collapse?
If you have justification for that claim. Now, if you do have justification for that claim, you must have access to some empirical evidence, right, that shows that the labor theory of value is false.
I would like to interject.
So what is that? Yeah, go ahead.
I think we have to move on.
Yeah.
And I think we might as well move on to some of the questions that came up in the live chat. If that's okay with you guys.
There was one thing I did want him to address as well, which was the point I made right at the top about knowledge being the primary driver of value in the workplace. That's the thing that determines people's wages. That's the thing there's your real value, quote unquote, in the work environments. That's why my father was paid the £500 or the £1,000 for his hour of work. It's not about the time; it's about the knowledge, because that is how labor works in the real world. In any market that you go to, it is what you know rather than how much time you spend that ultimately determines a lot of these things. So I need him to address that as well. Because
so you're talking about how, are you talking about how skilled laborers are paid more than unskilled laborers? Is that what you mean?
well, I mean, I'm talking about knowledge being the prime determining factor of value in a job.
How is that measured?
It's measured by how it's measured, just like any other commodity.
How is quantity of knowledge measured, and how does that determine what? That's what I'm trying to understand. It determines what, the price of the wage, or it determines the price of a good, or what?
So the knowledge of the knowledge that an individual worker can bring.
You're saying quantities of knowledge, right, determine prices? Is that the idea?
That knowledge has a bigger effect on price,
right, so how is that
than
measured?
time.
How is that measured?
It's measured by how much the employer is willing to pay for that knowledge.
Oh, so you're saying that what the employer believes the knowledge that somebody has is
correct,
will determine.
Because remember, value is subjective, and that is the only thing that counts.
But wait a minute. When you say value is subjective, you're using value in a specific sense that's different from the labor theory of value, right?
Yes, because I'm using the correct definition of value as I
When
have
you
been the whole time.
when you say correct definition, what in virtue of what is a definition correct rather than incorrect? Because I'm not understanding that.
It by definition of the fact that it is observable all the time in the real world, every minute of every day, because value, and as I said, you can see it. You can go to an auction. You can go to eBay. You can go to any place of work. You can ask anyone who's ever had a job in their life. These are the things that make the world go round. This is what value really is. How else is my father going to get paid £500 or £1,000 for an hour of his time?
You mean because he's a skilled laborer?
It's not just because he's a skilled laborer. It's because of what he specifically knew. They were paying for his knowledge,
is that
not for his time.
Different from what a skilled laborer is?
Well, it depends.
The labor theory of value, as you'll note, right? You'll note that what I talked about was quantities of unskilled labor.
Yes.
Right? So I'm not seeing how anything you're saying there contradicts the labor theory of value. But if you'd like to show me where there's a contradiction there, I'd like to understand. Because labor theory of value doesn't say that skilled laborers won't be paid more than unskilled laborers, right? It also doesn't say that the quantity of value that skilled laborers will produce is equal to the quantity of value that unskilled laborers produce, right? It doesn't say that. It says skilled laborers will produce greater quantities of value in the same amount of time vis-a-vis an unskilled laborer, right? So that's not a criticism of the theory.
All you're doing here is you're converting what I've said into units of labor time. Just so I understand what you're doing.
You're saying, right, that there's something about a worker having increased skill will somehow be a criticism of the labor theory of value. And I'm just not seeing where it contradicts the theory. That's what I'm asking you to specify.
Can you repeat that, please? Sorry.
Your claim is and was, right, that the fact that there are laborers who are paid more for their labor because they're more skilled laborers, right, and the fact that what they produce has more value than what is produced in the same amount of time by an unskilled laborer is somehow a criticism of the labor theory of value. And I'm not seeing how there's anything in the labor theory of value that contradicts that.
Okay, but okay, all right. Let's take these questions and move on. Let's just do it.
Okay, the first question, and a couple of people have asked it. People want to understand what are the actual predictions that come out of the labor theory of value. Can you list them?
Well, I mean, I can give you, I mean, there's about 11 of them if you want me to go through them all. Or I can just list a handful of them. So I'll let you decide.
Why don't you list a handful of them that maybe could somehow help people decide about what value is, what's a better definition of value, something like that.
The labor theory of value predicts that there should be widening inequality as a secular trend in capitalist economies. That's an example. It predicts that there should be centralization of capital over time, which is to say that there should be fewer firms. Well, I should say fewer owners of firms over time. It predicts that that the average size of firms should increase as a secular trend. It predicts that workers should be relatively eviscerated over time. So the idea is that the amount of the total value product that should be returned to workers should be a smaller and smaller percentage over time than what is returned to capital. It predicts that there should be cyclical depressions and recessions, and that it's not possible to do away with that as a cycle in capital, right? It's not possible to adopt monetary policies, fiscal policies, or government policies such as Keynesian mechanisms. It's not possible to actually prevent there being crashes. And it says that the explanation for those crashes is going to be a tendency of the rate of profit to decline during long wave periods of expansion, right? So that as the business cycle heats up, in tandem with that, there will be a decline in the rate of profit. That's a prediction that the theory makes. I don't know if you want me to keep going, but those are a handful. And as I say, those predictions, right, are all the predictions. I mean, by my assessment, there's at least 11. I think that all those predictions are empirically verifiable, and I can provide people with access to the empirical data that verifies those predictions.
Such as?
What are some examples of the data?
Yeah.
Well, I'd have to give you links to books and papers and, government sources and so forth.
Okay.
Okay. Another question. How can a tiny subset of goods being explained predict entire economies?
The reason for that is because Marx understands all value in the economy to be produced in the productive sectors, right? In the production of the restricted class of goods that Marx understands to be goods that have a value, right? And so that means that the remuneration to producers of other kinds of good, to people who work in the other industries, right? The most of the service sector, for example, right? That the source of all their profits comes from the productive sector, what Marx understands to be the productive sector, right? So it's because all value in the economy has its origin in production, and all profit has its origin in the surplus value produced in production, that it's possible for the labor theory of value to make predictions about the entire capitalist economy, not just about a restricted class of goods that Marx understands to be goods that are the product of value-producing labor.
Okay, another question. Can you explain the water diamond paradox using the LTV?
Well, it doesn't really seem like there's anything to explain, because the water is cheap because it doesn't take a large quantity of average unskilled labor to produce water, right? It's easily accessible, whereas in order to produce a diamond, it does take a large amount of labor to extract diamonds from the earth, right? So it's not actually a paradox for the labor theory of value. It's a paradox for subjective value theories. Now, of course, if a diamond falls out of the sky, right, no labor was expended. You know, if you go walk into your backyard and a diamond is fallen out of the sky, you can take that diamond to the market and sell it for a high price, even though you've expended no labor in producing diamonds, right? In producing that diamond. But the point is that the value of the diamond is determined by the average quantity of labor that it takes to reproduce it in that time and place. And for that reason, you can sell it for much more than the labor you expended in its bringing it to market, right? But now, if diamonds just fell out of the sky routinely, so that we wouldn't need to actually mine diamonds, we could just walk out into our backyards and expend very little labor in bringing them to market, the cost of diamonds would go down, all other things being equal. So I don't think there's really anything to explain on the labor theory of value. It's straightforward.
Well, we have one more question from the audience. How does the labor theory of value deal with the value of undeveloped land or raw resources?
Right. So virgin land is not taken to be a commodity for Marx because it's not the product of labor. So it's an example of a good that has a price without having a value, just like a Rembrandt painting. Now, if you expend labor on the land, right, you could perhaps produce a saleable good, which would be just like another commodity. But it rarely works that way straightforwardly, because land is affected by variability in such a thing as good land and bad land, highly productive land and land that is not productive. And so those differentials in the quality of land and the fact that free access to land, the access to land is restricted, result in a monopoly element to land pricing, even to non-virgin land. And that is what Marx understands to be the origin of rents.
Okay. Well, I suppose the next question is whether or not we want to open up the Hangout or end, or if each one of you wants to make a closing statement.
I'm happy to open it up, but I don't know if academic agent needs to go.
No, I'm in for the long haul now. I'm all right to stay. The only thing I'll say is that I do have to apologize for. I do have a habit of losing my temper occasionally. But I did come on this stream to discuss economics and not theology, and it really felt to me that all throughout this debate that Jack wanted to have a theological discussion about his particular religion of choice rather than actually discuss economics. So maybe that might be a starter for when we open up the discussion for others, because we really had a fundamental disagreement about the nature of what value is. And my understanding is that the idea that value is subjective is one of the fundamental laws of economics. So this is one of the issues that we had.
It
Yeah.
seems like that seems to be where the misunderstanding is too. Like it just seems odd that value isn't just the price at the end that someone pays.
But also, I mean, more importantly, it's subjective. It's not inherent or objective or some quality produced by some other thing. If you listen to, if you break it down to the most basic level, Marx and Jack are saying that products are basically kind of magically imbued with something once labor is applied to them, and this is the thing that determines value. But value isn't like that, and it never is like that. And it doesn't matter if money is involved, it is never like that. Value is always subjective. Ask a man if he thinks his wife is pretty, and then ask somebody else. So this is something that I think that we really have to deal with before we can deal with any other things, because one of the reasons why the whole debate was something of a car crash is because we just cannot agree on that simple point. And I want Jack to address whether he thinks what he's saying is that value is objective in some way, because I think that that's what he is saying.
Well, I mean, for us to disagree, we'd have to be talking about the same thing, right? And see, so I don't actually think there's a disagreement there, because when you're talking about value, you're using it in some kind of everyday sense, right? Whereas for Marx, value was a term of art. It was a term that he used, perhaps misleadingly, to delineate a theoretical unobservable, right? So for us to disagree about it, we'd have to actually have in our sights the same target. And it just doesn't seem to me that you're talking about the same thing that I'm talking about when I talk about value. So I don't think there is any disagreement. There's just a misunderstanding that we're talking about two different things rather than one.
Well, I guess the main point of disagreement is that I think that labor and labor time are basically irrelevant to value.
Yeah,
So,
now that's a perfectly reasonable skepticism to have, right? But in order for that to be a justified claim, there'd have to be an argument to show that the theory was false, right? Otherwise, you just have to say, well, nobody has shown me a convincing argument that I ought to accept that, right? In which case, somebody would have to give you that argument, right? But if you want to say, I just don't think that's what value is, right? It's perfectly fine opinion to have, right? But if somebody says, what's the justification for that claim, then you'd have to give an argument.
Helena, do you want to open it up at this point? Maybe I can go and get a cup of tea or something, and then I'll come back.
Yes, absolutely. I'm trying to get these people broadcast. It's not working for some reason.
You can't post links in the chat, as far as I'm aware.
I think I can.
All right. Well, I'll be back in a second. All right. I'll be back.
Okay. So for some reason I can't get you guys to show up in the broadcast. Let me see if I can just take a risk and turn these functions off in Cameraman and see if that's going to help any. Oh, there they go.
Howdy.
Hi.
What's going on now?
Well, so now we're, there were a lot of people in the live chat who really wanted, I think, to argue with Jack a little bit. And so I went ahead and let the link go. And I'm wondering if maybe Jack or the academic agent want to send some of their friends in or not. But right now we're kind of waiting for academic agent to come back. And so I guess if people want to ask any questions of Jack and about this labor theory of value, go right ahead. I'm going to post the link one more time for people.
Alrighty. Well, I'll wait for Jack or the academic agent to get back, because it'd be a question I'd have for basically any economist. But it has to do with the possibility of there actually being a lack of currency in the society, whether that society would still be capable of functioning. But I'll wait for Jack and the academic agent to get back before I actually ask that question like a structured way.
Yeah, and maybe you could repeat it again, because I'm kind of answering PMs. I'm a little bit distracted.
I just wanted to know what they would think about a society without a currency. Basically, for it just to be a raw exchange of purposeful value or functional value, in other words.
Hey.
Well, Marx didn't think there could be a capitalist economy without a money economy. So in order to do that, you'd have to abolish capitalism.
Sure.
In order to get rid of money.
The thing about it is, I'm actually asking if it's even possible for a society to function. I'm not really speaking on there being a bias towards capitalism or a bias towards the labor theory of value. I'm just asking if it's actually, something that could be achieved by humanity.
Historically, there have been societies that have not been run on the basis of money. Right?
But in a much more interconnected kind of global type society, because we're all interconnected via technology. So at this kind of scale, I'm sure there'd be some sort of, I guess, levels of like glass ceilings here and there of how far currency-less society could actually function at.
Jack, I thought there was something I thought you missed, because when you were explaining why you thought the various ways that Marxism could be falsified or whatever, or shown to be incoherent, etc. I think the one thing that you missed is that there could be a rival theory that better predicts the phenomena, but I didn't hear you say that.
Well, yeah, I alluded to that at one point, but I wanted, I think there it would be not so much that the theory was false, but that we have a better theory.
Right. Like that's similar to the way, the Newtonian mechanics was overturned by general relativity.
Right. So I imagine that there probably are ways. Well, I guess I'm not sure. I guess I'd have to talk to a physicist about it. My guess is that Newtonian theory is actually falsifiable.
Well, I think that it's useful at a certain scale, right? The point is that with Newtonian mechanics, it's useful at a certain scale, but then once you go beyond that scale,
right?
Actually,
So when you
false.
when you have bodies hurling at relativistic speeds, they're not actually going to conform to the predictions of Newtonian theory.
Right.
Okay, so getting off of Newtonian theory, Simon had a question, and I'm going to be AFK for just a very short period of time, but Simon, go ahead.
Okay,
Wait, before you go, I just want to say something that Helena would be fond of saying when the cat's away. So just keep that in mind while she's gone, and we can run riot.
This might be too serious a question then. It kind of refers to what Tonis was saying in some respects, because the question, I understood, I think I got the grasp of what you were saying about it, and accept the point about the equilibrium is the crucial misunderstanding, I guess. But accepting that, why then would Marx wish to would wish to refer to time as being a capable determinant of the equilibrium value?
Why we should measure labor in quantities of time?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's an intuitive reason why.
Yeah.
Which is that you could just sort of imagine an island society. Imagine a society in which people lived on an island, right? And you could make wooden shoes and you could collect coconuts. And let's imagine that they're not special skills. Pretty much anybody on the island can collect coconuts, and pretty much anybody on the island knows how to make wooden shoes, right? So the intuition is that it would be odd that if it took an hour to collect 10 coconuts and it took an hour to make a pair of shoes, that if somebody had collected 10 coconuts, right? Why would somebody who had made 2 pairs of shoes trade it at the rate of 10 coconuts rather than 20, right? If he could have just produced the same amount, he could have just produced the 10 coconuts in the same amount of time, right? So it seems like it would be quantity of labor time under those conditions would be what determines the rate at which commodities exchange, right? Now that's just an intuition. I don't know whether there's an additional argument to show why we should adopt labor time as the measure rather than some other measure, but I think we don't need to have an additional argument, right? If in fact using that metric we are actually able to generate the predictions that are novel, that verify the theories.
Sure.
Can I
think,
do you
go
I
ahead.
can refer to something in the book, the Introduction to Marxist Economic Theory. It starts on page 11 and moves to page 12. There are a couple examples like halfway through page 11, and I can send you this PDF if you want, Simon, but it talks about how historically labor time has been recorded and has been used to catalog, has been used in the exchange of goods. If you want, I can read that paragraph. There's one paragraph if you'd like. I can read it for you.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Great.
Okay, so it should be short. It shouldn't be that long. It says, in the Japanese villages of the Middle Ages, an accounting system in work hours, in the literal sense of the term, existed inside the village community. The village accountant kept a kind of great book in which he entered the number of hours of work done by villagers on each other's fields, since agriculture was still mainly based on cooperative labor, with harvesting, farm construction, and stock breeding being done in common. The number of work hours furnished by the members of one household to the members of another was very carefully tallied. At the end of the year, the exchanges had to balance. That is, the members of household B were required to have given household A exactly the same number of work hours which the members of household A had given household B during that year. The Japanese even refined things to the point almost 1,000 years ago, where they took into account that children provided a smaller quantity of labor than adults, so that an hour of child labor was worth, quote unquote, worth only half an hour of adult labor. A whole system of accounting was set up along those lines. There are more examples in this PDF of,
Well,
that. If you,
Yeah, I mean, fantastic. That's great. It struck me that there was another reason, which was the totality of a single person's work being finite. Right? So the number of hours that you can put into a project is finite for any worker. Right? So there is some kind of parceling of or quantity, right, of a unit of the value. Right? Does that ring true or not, Jack?
I'm not sure whether I can assess the relevance of that or not. As to,
I mean, it doesn't Marx make a distinction between feudal economies like that, what would have been the Japanese one, and the and capitalism? Doesn't he say that? I'm trying to remember now. Doesn't he say something like in under feudalism, all objects had a use value, and it's only in capitalism when goods are made essentially for exchange rather than use that labor theory of value comes into play, something like that.
He does think the labor theory of value is specific to the capitalist mode of production. So what you'd have to look at in something like the feudal mode of production, I mean, there are going to be certain broad similarities, but you're not going to have a genuine labor theory of value for the feudal mode of production.
So I've got a question.
He basically thinks that feudalism operated according to different laws than the laws that govern capitalist economies.
Yeah.
Josh's example is an example where they're talking about the value of the time being equal, right? So they're not specifying what the job is. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
I think
Right.
I think that's right.
Okay, so that's the full extension of it. Okay, I get it.
So, because this is another way in which I guess, because even though I didn't make it explicit, I guess I was generally arguing from a Austrian perspective in most of the debates, and I think one of the big differences between the Austrian school and Marxism is that we think that the laws of economics basically don't change. That the laws of supply and demand and the way that markets function, it doesn't matter if it's ancient Rome, a feudal market town, or now, the underlying reality remains the same. The only things that change are the political structures, the political power, and the extent to which it allows markets to function. And I'm guessing, like, are all the people in this chat at the moment various different stripes of socialist or Marxist?
No, I'm Austrian as well. Sort of.
One thing I thought it might be fun to do is that over on Mises, somebody actually wrote down what they thought the 10 fundamental laws of economics were, and I thought it might be fun to go through them and to see which ones you object to. I'll note that the labor theory of value is not one of them, but it could actually help us. It could actually help pinpoint exactly where we disagree.
Well, I've got a question before we can do that. That
Sure.
kind of, it's like a theoretical question. I didn't want to get left behind on it before.
You go ahead and ask the question, and then we'll go through the items that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as far the way my understanding of the theory is, there's this concept of socially necessary labor time. So it's a unit of labor time of I guess unskilled. I always heard this the average skilled worker, but I guess it's the unskilled worker. The amount of labor time to make that commodity would be the value. But it seems to me that there could be a double counting problem where, because there are varying degrees of automation in different industries, On the one hand, you can say that the socially necessary labor time to produce a wooden pencil is simply the labor time involved in running the machinery, maintaining it, so on and so forth. But on the other hand, you could say that the machine itself is something that was produced by human labor. And that machine itself being produced by human labor will have itself a component of value that is derived from a certain amount of labor time. And so if you're making a pencil, like a wooden 25 cents pencil, but you're using a $10,000 piece of machinery that was produced by human labor, that the pencil itself would that be taking some kind of fraction of the labor? Like, say that the machine has a lifespan of 100,000 pencils. Is it taking that kind of fraction off? Or do we include basically, do we include the labor that goes in to build the capital equipment used to produce the pencil, or do we strictly speak of the current, in the moment labor time involved in producing a wooden pencil?
So I think on Marxism, when there's like essentially a machine that operates as like a block of value, and it does redistribute some of its value to the commodities it produces.
So one way to think about it, so the formula for value, right, is constant capital plus variable capital plus surplus value, right? So constant capital is going to include machinery, buildings, tools, energy inputs, raw materials, and things like auxiliary products like soap and lubricants, right, that are consumed in the production process, right? So all of that outlay is a contributor to the value of the final product on the theory. Now, when it comes to fixed capital assets, things like buildings and machinery, the idea is that they contribute just a portion of the of their value to the final value product, right? So let's say you had a machine that cost $1,000, right? And it lasted for 10 years, right? So the idea is that if you ran that machine regularly, in a year's worth of production, right, it would contribute $100 to the value of the good you were producing. Because in 10 years, you'd have to replace it, right? So 1/10 of that 10 years would be 1 year. So 1/10 of the $1,000 that the machine cost would be $100, right? So if you produced, I don't know, let's say in a year's time, you produced, I don't know, 100 chairs, right? So you'd have $100 of the value of those chairs at the end of a year would be composed of the contribution of the fixed capital assets to the production process, right? Similarly, the raw materials, if you laid out $1,000 in wood per year, then you'd have $1,000 contributing to the chairs, right? So that'd be $2,000 worth of constant capital assets, right? And then the variable capital would be the wage, would be the average wage. So let's say you employed $1,000 worth of labor in a year, of unskilled labor in a year, right? So you'd have the 2,000 from constant capital and the $1,000 from variable capital from the wage, and then there would be the surplus value, which is a percentage, is understood to be the rate at which that surplus value would be produced would be understood to be a percentage, the rate of exploitation or the rate of surplus value. So if you had a rate of surplus value at 100%, that would mean for every $100 that you paid workers, workers would produce an additional $100 worth of surplus value. So if you had a rate of 100%, you'd have a value product that totaled $4,000 at the end of the yearly production process, right? Now, the idea is that the constant capital assets, the fixed capital, such as buildings and machinery, as well as the elements of production that are used up in the production process, such as the raw materials and the energy inputs, those are understood to be decomposable into quantities of labor time themselves. Because the idea is that you can understand each of those goods to be produced by the same formula: constant capital plus variable capital plus surplus value. And so each time you have a constant capital component, you have to keep decomposing into constant capital, variable capital, and surplus value until all the constant capital is understood to be valued entirely in terms of quantities of variable capital and surplus value, which are products of, which is the value that's produced by labor. So there isn't any double counting because everything is finally reproducible into units of labor time.
Well, okay, so I have a question. I think there is double counting.
I'd like to ask for a clarification in terms of how surplus value is actually determined. So you take the amount of money that is being produced, or the amount of money that is made from the value of the labor after the wage is paid. So let's say you have a worker who's paid $100, like in your example, and he makes $200 off of that day. So there's a $100 worth of gross surplus value, if you will. In terms of overhead costs, such as electricity, management, etc., is that factored into finding out real surplus value?
Well, so electricity is an energy input, so that's actually going to be considered a constant capital input. But there's going to be at least electricity with respect to production, maybe not the electricity that you pay to light your account, your bookkeeper's office, right? But the electricity that you need to run your machines is going to be an energy input. So that's going to be counted as a unit of constant, units of constant capital. Now, the capitalist does pay other costs besides the outlay for constant capital and for wages. He pays for things like security guards, accountants, insurers. He pays interest, he pays rents, he pays for advertising, he pays fees for merchants, all kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
So those are understood by Marx to be deductions from the surplus value that he recoups if he sells the good at value.
Okay, so unproductive labor is removed from the surplus value, essentially.
It's a deduction from it, yeah.
Okay.
He sells the good. He sells the good. Let's say if we use the example that I gave where he had $4,000, right? $3,000 of capital outlay plus $1,000 of surplus value. If he sells that $4,000 worth of value at value, right? $4,000 worth of goods at value, he'll recoup the $3,000 which is the counter value of what he's paid in constant capital outlay and wages outlay. He'll have the $3,000 back, and he'll have an additional $1,000 of surplus value. And then from that $1,000, he has to pay out all those other costs. He'll have to pay his bookkeepers, his timekeepers, his security guards. He'll have to pay interest and rents and taxes and so forth.
Okay,
And whatever's
so
left over out of that is understood to be what Marx calls profit of enterprise.
okay, so if we can go back to the double counting issue, the problem that I'm having is that, like, say we have this consumer good sitting on the shelf, and we go back in all the stages of production and all the capital equipment that was required for the machinery to produce that good. When you go all the way down to the materials, you always end up with this labor cost at the bottom of someone mining something. But if the miner is using machinery as well, then it goes back to an entirely different cycle, to where you're looking at the machine that he's driving, or using to extract material from the mine, which is produced by someone by other producers, capital goods industry producers, who themselves use machinery, which is also comprised of raw materials and is also constructed using human labor. And when you go through the cycle, you find that you never actually get to the bottom of where this.
Well, no, that's not exactly right. So you you have so we'll use the initial C, V, and S, right, for constant capital, variable capital, and surplus value, right? So let's say you are we can use the example of the chairs, right? So your constant capital is going to include a machine to a production line, production line machines to assemble chairs, and it's also going to include things like wood and nails, right? So the value of the let's take the wood, right? The wood itself is going to be, let's say let's say it's $1,000 worth of wood for a year's supply, right? So the wood itself is going to be decomposable into units of C, V, and S, right? So there's going to be machines that are required, like chainsaws,
right,
and I don't know, polishers and whatever. Let's assume you don't need any raw materials to cut down trees. You just need machines, right? So that's going to be decomposable into units of C, V, and S. Now then you have C, which is those machines, right? The chainsaws and the wood polishers or whatever, right? And so again, you decompose all of those into units of C, V, and S, right? It's never going to be, there's never going to be a case where you can't decompose C into further C, V, and S, right? And where you can, you'll just have V and S, right? Sooner or later, it has to bottom out.
Well, okay, wouldn't it be like an asymptote that never reaches the point, though? Because if at the bottom of it you have multiple different complex industries that have machinery involved with it, once you break down one stage of production all the way to the mining stage, which is involving itself machinery, you've broken all the C, V, and S stages all through that stage. There's still yet, like, even at the mining stage, I don't think you would ever reach the bottom.
Well, every machine that's ever been produced without another machine, right, was produced merely by natural wealth, raw materials that you could extract without machines, and labor, right? So that's for every machine that is assembled by other machines, right, at some point in its history is traceable back to a machine, is traceable back to a machine that was produced merely by human labor and raw materials without other machines.
Right.
So
I
it
don't think
has
I'm
to
talking
bottom
so
out.
much.
It has to
I don't
bottom
think
out in machines like that.
I don't think I'm speaking strictly in terms of the life history of the good, in terms of going back in time. Instead, I think I'm talking about almost like a circular way of analyzing this, that one industry would end up feeding back in on itself. Like say you had an industry that's producing tires, but it's using is producing tires for other machinery to be used, and all the machinery that was used in the production of these tires was manufactured, and it has a stage of production that uses vehicles, which itself uses tires. Like to me, I think that you could have a static system where you've got one industry as a component to itself, right?
Yeah, but
Maybe
the point is that every time you get a C, right, it's going to be decomposable into either V plus S or C plus V plus S, right? And so you just keep decomposing C until you get V plus S. That's the only thing you get left.
Can I ask why is it necessary to do this? Why can't the price points or the production costs be the measure of these things? Why do you have to come up with a C?
It's just so that the theory can be consistent.
Okay, all right.
The theory is saying, right, that all value is composed of quantities of labor time, right? That the magnitude of value is determined by quantity of labor time. So constant capital has a value, right? So therefore it has to be understood in terms of quantities of labor time. Otherwise its value would go unexplained.
But that would have at its root, everything has to come down to unskilled labor, like at the bottom of,
yes,
of every production
or
stage.
something. Well, it doesn't have to come down to unskilled labor. It has to be measurable in units of unskilled labor. Because you could have skilled laborers, right, somewhere in the production process. That's not decomposable into unskilled labors in any manifest sense, right? But we can understand that a skilled laborer in our value accounting is to be understood as measurable in units of unskilled labor multiplied by a coefficient, which is, you know, what makes unskilled labor, what makes skilled labor produce a greater quantity of value in the same amount of time.
Can I just, I mean, is it possible that there's this massive emphasis on unskilled labor because in 1860 the economy was primarily based on manufacturing, with a very clear capitalist class and a very clear working class in London at that time? And I mean, now so much of the economy is made up of things that aren't manufacturing, or jobs and industries that have essentially no unskilled labor involved at all. I'm thinking of, I don't know, Google, for example. Like I don't even know where the unskilled labor would be in that whole process.
Well, again,
like,
Marx understands. He just understands units of unskilled labor time as a unit of accounting, right?
Right.
So you don't have to have any unskilled labor at all anywhere in your production process, right? In theory, right? You could have all skilled labor, but we would still measure it in the labor theory of value according to units of unskilled labor.
So how can I figure out that I don't know, a blade stack in a server somewhere, you know, in a Google server in Arizona, like what's the point of breaking that down into units of unskilled labor time, and how do we even come by that calculation? Like, how can we even work that out?
Well, I'm not sure that there would be a way that you could come up with that calculation, right? It's just, the theory is just postulating, right, that there is some theoretical way of understanding the quantity of value produced as explicable in terms of those units, right?
But do you see how in the way that I was explaining it, where essentially price is a reflection of value as defined by what people want, that we have there's no such calculation. It's just very easy to figure out, well, this is worth this much to me because I'm willing to pay.
But you're not
this
offering
much.
a theory of equilibrium prices there.
But like, essentially, do any of the rest of you guys here understand why it's necessary to come up with that theory?
Well, as I understand it, is that Marx literally does not use any currency or anything that could be called currency in order to measure what value is. So he needs to have something that he can use as a yardstick. And what he uses is the socially necessary abstract labor time, or essentially unskilled labor, as the lowest common denominator.
That's right.
My problem that I'm having right now is that, okay, we've established that he's using this unskilled labor time as the lowest common denominator, the yardstick that he is using to measure value. Okay, well, let's take the example. Let's say we were talking about Google. First of all, unskilled labor in terms of Google probably doesn't even exist, or maybe it did at some point.
Well,
really
Google doesn't actually. I don't think Google produces products. Well, I guess maybe like a Google phone, maybe, but like if you're talking about things like
a service still requires labor, correct?
Yeah, but
like,
that's not understood to be something that's that the labor theory of value is attempting to theorize, right? They don't theorize things like computing services.
Let's take a more conventional service then. Like, how would you measure the value of a massage, for example?
But I don't think Marx would understand a massage to be a product of value.
Do you not see why this is a problem, Jack? That Marx can't explain vast areas of our economy, and I mean, I guess the point I was trying to make.
Why would it be a problem, right?
Because
the theory of gravity doesn't explain genetics, right? So it's not attempting to.
Well, the theory of gravity is very specific towards one phenomenon. The theory of value is supposed to explain all value.
No,
period.
it isn't. It isn't. That's not what the theory of value is.
It's explaining specifically manufacturing processes in 1860, as far as I can work out.
The problem is that it's narrow.
It's not attempting to be a theory of 1860 or anything like that. It's attempting to be a theory of what Marx understands commodities to be in any capitalist economy.
But it can't.
So it's not specific to the 1860s.
But it can't figure out Google Analytics as a product. It can't figure out a massage as a product.
It doesn't.
It can't figure out.
It isn't attempting to provide a theory of those types of objects. The
problem seems to be that it's not just that the theory is narrow. It's that the theory has broad, sweeping implications for the macroeconomy, while only taking into account I
explained why that was possible, right? Which is that Marx understands all value to have its source in the productive sector.
Right, which is what I said earlier, and you said that you wouldn't have to even have a single unskilled laborer at any stage of your production.
Well, you could have skilled laborers.
It would simply be an abstract.
You could have skilled laborers, but the point is they'd still be engaging in value-producing labor, and it would be the value produced in those sectors that is the source of all the value in the economy. right?
But
So
when it-
Marx's idea
Yeah.
is that Google and these other service industries, most service industries, right, don't actually produce value. They produce something that is saleable, that they can, that they can put a price on that people will pay for. But that's not what Marx understands value to be. Some
Is
goods,
that be- is
some
that because-
goods have prices and don't have value for Marx.
Right. So could let me I'm going to assert something, and you're going to tell me if you agree with it or disagree. Okay. So the root of the problem, the reason that the labor theory of value has an implication for the broad macroeconomy is because the labor theory of value gives you a concept of surplus value, and the surplus value is what is freeing up all of the different resources into the ability to produce things like a Rembrandt painting or any leisurely activity like that is taken away, in a sense, from the unskilled workforce, the proletariat, and in a way is through that exploitation that is defined as a surplus value, that's redistributed to the bourgeoisie.
Yeah, surplus value is what ultimately ends up paying for insurance companies, advertisers, software engineers, etc. You name it, the whole gamut.
But Jack,
So
that's
okay.
obviously not. I mean, I hate to bring it back to the real world all the time, but that's just not true, is it? I mean, so much of the economy is paid for by financial services. The financial service industry alone would
But that's not
support
contradicting.
fintech.
That's not
Yes,
contradicting.
so Marxists would say
That's
that
not contradicting the theory,
It is
right? Marx is
it
saying,
is contradicting it because you just said, Jack, that
I'm
all
saying
of these
that the
other
money
services
that
are.
they're. I'm saying
Hold
that
on,
the
let's
money
let
that.
academic
Well,
finish.
I know what he's going to say. I'm saying that the money that the
Oh.
financial firms are paid, right, has its source in
It doesn't.
surplus value production. Well, you'd
No, it
have to
doesn't.
what he's
demonstrate
saying
that.
is, okay, so what he's saying is that the reason that the accountant, the reason that the insurance agent has the job he does, rather than being a subsistence farmer who produces everything for himself, is precisely because there are these unskilled workers who are producing more than they consume themselves, and therefore thereby freeing up the non-unskilled workforce.
Well, it is true that because there is surplus value produced, that there is money to pay insurers and financial specialists. Yes, it's from.
Right. So it creates a division of labor, which a capitalist, in terms of ideological sense, a capitalist would say that the division of labor is what allows for humans to live above subsistence.
Yes, Marx would agree with that.
Okay.
But
So,
I mean,
well,
it's superficially. I mean, it is true that the only reason that we can move beyond like hunter-gatherer societies is because the farmers are producing enough food to free up time for some other guy to go and be like a philosopher, some other guy to go and be, I don't know, a tax keeper, a tax man, say. I mean, if you go back, it is true that the more people you have, the more efficient your food production is, the more time it frees up for other people to do other things. But it is not true that it's not true that all of the value in society is created from unskilled labor.
And when you say value, are you using value to mean what the labor theory of value means by value, or do you mean something different?
This is 100% where I want to interject here.
Okay, go on, Frank.
When we talk about value, we have to have a definition of value itself before we can even talk about what's in the labor theory of value.
Well, I thought we discussed that.
Well, yeah, and this was half the reason why I didn't really want to come into this, discussion. But someone kept badgering me in the chat about it. But you have to revisit this idea that what exactly is the definition of value before we can start talking about, well, what does the labor theory of value say what value is?
It's a theoretical, unobservable that's postulated to explain equilibrium prices. And the theory.
Again, you can't talk about prices either. Like we can't talk about prices until we understand what value is. You're kind of conflating the two ideas
It's
here.
close. Why could I not talk about?
Because prices aren't set arbitrarily. You don't set a price arbitrarily. That doesn't happen. That's nonsensical to even
Who
think
said
about it.
that prices were set up arbitrarily?
If you don't
Did
have
I
a
say
theory
that?
of value, if you don't have some sort of theory of
I have
value,
a theory
and
of
if you don't
value.
have a theory, or if you don't have a definition of value before that, then you can't talk about prices. You're putting the cart before the horse. You have to explain what value is before you can talk about the theory of value, and then before you talk about prices, you have to talk about what your theory of value is.
We understand what prices are, right? Before we have the idea of value, right?
Don't even say the word price, because that's part of the problem. You can't talk about
Before the labor theory of value was, did people know what prices were? Did they?
like what, structural
Yep.
definition of it?
Prices are literally
did they
just
know
the
what prices
objective
were?
measurement of what something is worth on the market.
Did we understand what a market price was before theories of value were developed? Did people
Yep.
have that concept?
Yeah.
That's irrelevant to what's going to go on, though, because
My point is, right, that the way the labor theory of value was developed, right, was that market prices were observed, right? We knew what market prices were, right? Before there was a labor theory of value, we knew what market prices were. Now, what people noticed when they studied market prices was that underlying market prices, there appeared to be equilibrium prices.
okay, that's great.
Right.
But, like when you
And so then they moved from there, right, from the observation that there appeared to be equilibrium prices, they had an explanatory problem, right, which is, what is it that explains equilibrium prices, right?
Well,
How do
right.
we
Okay, so
account
that's
for the fact that the equilibrium prices are at one magnitude rather than another? Now, obviously, you can't appeal to supply and demand under those conditions, because the idea behind equilibrium prices is that supply and demand cancel each other out in equilibrium, right? When they're at
Okay.
equilibrium, they
Equilibrium
cancel
price
each
is
other
basically
out. I'm not
market
done
clearing
yet.
price.
I'm not done yet. So you can't appeal to, so at least for these theorists, right, they didn't believe that you could appeal to supply and demand as the explanation for equilibrium prices, because the whole point was that supply and demand ceased to explain the magnitude of the equilibrium prices when they canceled each other out at equilibrium. That was their idea, right?
Okay,
And so what they then did was say, okay, let's try to figure out what determines equilibrium prices if we can't appeal to supply and demand to explain that, right? And one proposal was that we could explain it in terms of quantities of labor. Now, that theory was developed in a 90-year period, right? Wealth of Nations was published in 1776. Volume 1 of Capital was published in 1867. So it's 91 years in which that theory was refined and improved, right? Now, again, for you to say that there's a problem with the theory, right, you're going to have to deal with it in the same way that every scientific theory that's proposed is done. You can show that there's a logical problem with the theory, right? You can show there's some kind of contradiction in the theory. That's one option for you. Another option for you is to say, well, the theory is unfalsifiable, right?
All right. Oh,
okay. I have a question
is,
before someone tries to do that.
well, let me just finish. Let me just finish the exposition, so there's no lack of clarity about this as this unfolds, right? So you could try to show that the theory is unfalsifiable. That would be another option for you. Another option would be to say it's an entirely ad hoc theory, right?
Right. Okay. So
and then
so
a fourth option would be to say that the theory has been empirically falsified, right? So if you're going to take this high-handed attitude that the theory is just a bunch of nonsense, right? You're going to have to do one of those four things. So I invite you to do that. Come up with the best
so
criticisms
let me ask
you
my question
can.
first. Let me ask my question first because it's important. Okay, so when if you are a proponent of this theory, are you a proponent of the theory in the sense that you believe it is describing a real relationship between this abstract concept and the world, or are you invoking it sort of as an instrumentalist would, where he would say, well, it generates a prediction that is true, that has that we can use, that is relevant, but it may not be describing an actual relationship in the world. And the reason I ask that is because so the reason I ask that is because probably at least 3 people in the room think about economics from the standpoint of it being a macroscopic description of individual actors in a marketplace. And so when we describe economics, when we develop a theory of value or a theory of how things operate in economics, we do it strictly in terms of the behavior and the mindset, the decisions of individual actors in the marketplace. And so when we're describing value or interest rates or aggregate demand or supply and demand, when we describe these relationships, we only ever do so when you can sort of analyze them in terms of human individuals, or visualize them as a direct consequence of individual actors' decisions. So like interest rate, the way that humans value time will generate a certain kind of macroscopic prediction about interest rates and inflation, for example. Whereas on this, the labor theory of value, it's difficult to think of a causal chain of events that would invoke the labor time in order to generate this abstract equilibrium price. So that's my question: is what sense?
I'm still not see, because the thing is that any dispute between an instrumentalist and a scientific realist isn't going to be a scientific dispute, right? So if we're evaluating the theory as a scientific theory, right, that dispute is going to be irrelevant. And in fact, I don't see why any scientific theory couldn't be equally held by an instrumentalist or a realist, right? If both instrumentalism, let's assume for the sake of argument that both instrumentalism and realism are logically coherent positions to have in the philosophy of science, right? I don't see why any scientific theory, right, would be affected by taking a position, one position or another with respect to that dispute, which I take to be a metaphysical dispute.
Well,
right?
the reason I think that it at least matters in terms of, it matters that it's clarified for the sake of discussion, is because it's unclear whether or not we are taking this value
no, the point is
as a true description of how things operate in the marketplace.
The point is, right, that for any scientific theory, right, we're going to adduce the same criteria to criticize it, which is the criteria that I adduced, right? Things like criticizing its logical coherence, its falsifiability, its degree of ad hocness, or its degree of empirical disconfirmation.
I disagree because when you criticize a theory in terms of its usefulness, like Newtonian mechanics, that's one thing. But criticizing a theory in terms of it describing something in the real world is an entirely different issue. So I think probably most people are hearing the labor theory of value and thinking that it's a description of real events in time, as opposed to a kind of measure that we could use.
Would you be able to criticize it using other criteria than the ones that I've adduced?
It depends on whether or not you're criticizing.
Agent talk here, since he's.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Okay.
I guess what I've been trying to drive at is that I do think it is a completely ad hoc theory that could only have been come up in it.
Great. So you'd have to show how the predictions
Jack,
that the theory.
Okay,
Finish.
so Jack, you've talked a lot. Let me talk for some time now. Okay. My contention is that Marx came up with this stuff in the mid-19th century at a time when manufacturing was the thing that was driving the UK economy. If you look at the UK in 2017, 80% of the economy is services based. And you said in our conversation just now that Marx basically, like the labor theory of value, doesn't account for services, which is 80% of the economy. Financial services alone, which is just under like 7-8%, contributed 124.2 billion pounds last year to the UK economy. Okay, loads of jobs, loads of money in the system is there purely as a result of financial services. Okay, that's without getting into tech services, people like Google, all of these things that you basically said the theory doesn't account for or can't describe, or Marx wasn't interested in those things. I mean, I would posit that the reason that Marx can't handle or account for those things is because he was writing in 1860. I would also posit that the reason that Marxists today are virtually obsessed with manufacturing is because of the exact same reason. It can only describe that one small bit. I would also posit that it means nothing, since there is so little unskilled labor in all of these industries that I'm talking about, the tech industry, financial services, that it really has so little to do with the reality of how the economy works in a country like the UK today, that we can just throw it out. It has no use. And that is why economists generally, as I started the conversation how many hours ago, don't use it, because it doesn't tell us anything about how things work. It's falsifiable by the fact that none of the things that he said came true, and they're not true, are they? So
these are more assertions, right? You've now made several claims. You've made the claim that it's ad hoc. I didn't see an argument there that it was ad hoc. I didn't even see any understanding as to what it means to say that a theory is ad hoc. So maybe you can explain that to me. You're also making the claim that it's been falsified. So what I'm asking you to do, if you're saying that it's been falsified, is to cite a specific prediction that the theory makes, show me how the theory makes that prediction, right? Okay. And then show me the empirical evidence that the theory has been falsified.
Okay,
right?
well,
so you haven't done any of those things.
I did. The prediction.
Okay, so let's start. You're now claiming. Right. So we're gonna leave aside the ad hoc issue. We're gonna talk about falsification.
No, well, I think
which issue is it?
All right, let me ask you a different question. If Marx had been living in 2017 rather than 1860, would he have come up with a labor theory of value?
How is that a criticism of the theory? Because answer to that question.
I'm saying that his theory is a product of his time and his place.
Great.
Which is a very Marxist idea.
If it's merely a product of its time and its place, right? It's presumably not empirically adequate to describe what it purports to describe empirically, right? Which would mean to say that its predictions are empirically falsified. So which prediction of it is empirically falsified?
Well, okay, have the prices of all of the different products in manufacturing continue to go through the floor since 1860 to now.
What do you mean by go through the floor?
Well, you said that. I mean, as I understand it, the idea of this labor theory of value is that because the trend of price, because profits will trend downwards, eventually capitalism will collapse. Has that been happening, Jack?
Has the rate of profit declined as a secular trend?
In manufacturing?
Yeah, there has been a decline in the rate of profit as a secular trend, but that isn't actually the claim that I made, right? I made the claim that there is a decline in the rate of profit in long wave periods of expansion, which is a different claim from the claim that the rate of profit has declined as a secular trend.
Can you elaborate on that?
The idea is that in the course of the business cycle, right, that there will have to be a decline in the rate of profit. That's a different claim from the idea that what happens in the
general business cycles, like for all manufacturing, period?
Yeah.
There's a few things that I'd like to bring up that I had been kind of waiting to ask about. A few of them were in the chat, but I guess first of all, if we're going to take something that let's say stonemasonry or something like that, where you could say that it is some sort of a manufacturing process where there's no such thing as unskilled labor. How do you figure out what unskilled labor is to even get your unit of unskilled labor?
Well, the theory isn't actually trying to calculate units of unskilled labor, right?
But it's
just
required
positing.
for the theory, right?
It's required for the theory that in principle, right, there should be some explicability.
But if you can't derive your unit of measurement from whatever it is you're trying to measure, then how do you measure it?
Well, the measures are indirect.
Okay,
We don't measure. You can't measure value directly, right? Because we don't actually have access to all the books of all the firms in the world, right? If we had access to all the books in all the firms in the world,
it's an innumerable number of calculations. I agree with that, but I'm just saying
you can't measure value directly. However, the labor theory of value does generate certain predictions that we can evaluate.
Okay, well, I'm just asking, in a vacuum, how do we figure out for this particular stonemason what unskilled labor is for this job? Like, take off the table the people who made all of his equipment, the people who
Well, as I said, I'm not sure that there is a way to do that. But see, I don't think that anything important. I don't think anything important turns on that, right? Because the labor theory of value isn't evaluated by looking at individual firms, right, and looking at the books in those firms and trying to figure out.
Well, what you're saying is this theory is supposed to be for measuring the value of manufactured goods, right? I'm bringing a manufactured good that only can be made with
the theory is saying. The theory is saying, right, for any manufactured good, that what will determine the equilibrium price, at least under certain restricted conditions, will be the average quantity of unskilled labor that it takes to produce that good. Now, the theory is not committed to saying that we can actually measure that, right? It's just saying, it's just postulating this. It's a hypothesis. It's saying, let's say that this is what determines it, right? If we start from that assumption, we start from that hypothesis that what determines the equilibrium price is the average quantity of unskilled labor, what can we deduce given that assumption?
Okay, well, allow
and
me
then what
to,
we can deduce through a complicated series of chains of reasoning, right? We can deduce these larger long-range predictions from those starting assumptions, and it is by evaluating whether those long-range predictions have taken place in accord with what's predicted that we can evaluate the theory. That's how it works.
Okay, well, I have a couple other things that I'd like to throw out there. I guess, first of all, I'd just like to clarify that equilibrium price is not the cancellation of supply and demand. Equilibrium price is the market clearing price. It's just where supply and demand meet. It is not.
So I'm understanding equilibrium price in the way that Smith understood natural prices, right? So for Smith, right, what a natural price is if we were to plot the prices, the market prices of a good over time on a graph, right? We would be able to draw a roughly straight line. Maybe it would be slightly downward, right, through that series of oscillations, which would be a basic axis of prices that we would observe. Well, at least it would appear to be that we could observe the market prices to be oscillating around, right? So that's just an artifact that we have that we observe if we plot the prices on a graph, right? Now, the prices that we plot on a graph are real, right? Those are the actual observed market prices. And
Okay, yeah.
so the fact that we can draw this line through it, right, is a question for theoretical science, right? Its question is, what explains why the line is there rather than elsewhere on the graph?
Well,
right?
that
That's
assumes
the question.
that the price
That's the question. That's the question that Smith was trying to answer, right? And that's the same question that Ricardo was trying to answer and that Marx was trying to answer. Now, not everybody is interested in that question, right? Some people think it's an uninteresting question. That's perfectly fine. Marx thought it was an interesting question, and he thought if I tried to explain it with this hypothesis, right, can I get something interesting, right? And I'm saying that I think that if you get the types of predictions that he's able to generate with his hypothesis, that's going to be of interest to most people.
What did he predict?
So I have another question.
I went through some of those predictions earlier, as you'll recall.
Well, I'd like to make a comment real quick.
When Helena was repeating a question from the live chat about what were some of the general predictions the theory made. And as you'll recall, I said there were about 11 of them. I only ran through a handful of those, but I can give you a whole list of those later if you'd like.
Real quick, though, before we move on to something else, it's just in terms of plotting real prices on a graph, there are a few assumptions that are made here. First of all, that whatever the real price of X good is, and let's assume that it's as homogeneous a good as humanly possible to create. That assumes two things. One, that the nature of the good does not change over time. And two, that the price was selected and sold at fairly close to correctly over time. Now, obviously, if you sell something either grossly overpriced and you end up with a massive surplus, or grossly underpriced and you end up with massive shortages.
Supply and demand. Supply and demand is precisely what is being presupposed in market prices, that there are going to be those differences in supply and demand. So that's not going to be that's not going to be an assumption that's a problem for the view, right? It's precisely because
it affects how the points are plotted on the graph, right? Because if you're making the assumption that it ends up around a straight line, right? Because it all tends towards this.
I'm not making the assumption. I'm saying that's what economists observed, and that's what they were interested in explaining.
The straight line is just the easiest way to show supply and demand. It's not necessarily what it looks like.
That's
in real life.
That's fine. The point is that the fact that we're able to draw that line and it's in one place rather than another place, right, is a question that those theorists were seeking to explain. They were trying to figure out, why is the line there rather than higher or lower on the graph, right? And they provided a theory of that. Now, again, if you want to say there's a problem with the theory, then you have to go about criticizing the theory the way that all other scientific theories are criticized. And that's what I'm asking you guys to do, if that's what your interest is in doing. I mean, if you think the theory is wrong or bad or whatever, then I'm just asking you to support that claim.
To me. Right. So to me, I think that
how would it be superfluous? How would it be superfluous if it actually predicts the things that I said that it predicts? How would that make it superfluous?
Because hold on.
Yeah.
Okay. Because when you evaluate the decisions of individual actors, in the economy, you would say that when the productivity of a goods producing process increases, you expect if it does so across the entire industry, you expect the price of that to go down.
Mm-hmm. That's it.
But then, you could do that exhaustively in terms of individual human actors. You would never. It seems to me, at least, that that unskilled labor time doesn't get its foot in the door to be somehow causal.
I'm not seeing how this is an answer to my question, right?
Because it's an alternative. Right. You have an alternative
theory.
explanation that deals.
You don't have an alternative explanation
we
that simultaneously.
do, Jack.
Okay,
We
so
do, Jack.
you tell me the theory that predicts the same things that the labor theory of value predicts. What is that theory?
Okay. Well,
Wait, listen.
Yeah.
Do you have a theory like that or not?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So what's
yes.
the theory?
Well, just basic economics is the theory.
Basic economics.
Yes.
Basic.
Listen,
Jack, in order to
shut up.
understand it, let's just let
quiet.
academic
Come on.
patient explain the theory. Give him some time. The alternative theory.
All right. Okay. So basically, if you have free market competition, it will drive the price point down for the consumer. Okay, and it obviously drives the price point down because more people buy goods at a lower price. So there is an incentive for producers to try to undercut the competition, and this has happened time and time again in different markets. And that happens. You can see it in the price of, I don't know, a television set, for example. They were a lot more when they first came out, and then over time they steadily went down as the cost of production went down, and competition increased and demand increased and all the rest of it. And these are the things that drove it down. We don't need the labor theory of value to explain.
So let's look closely at what you're saying, right? So you're claiming that there is a subjective value theory that predicts what the labor theory of value predicts, right? Is that right?
Well, to an extent.
It's a yes or no question.
Over the life cycle of a given
Look, is
commodity.
your criticism that you have a theory that does the same thing that the labor theory of value does, and therefore the labor theory of value is unnecessary? Because for you to do that, for you to have that, it would have to make the same predictions that the labor theory of value makes, right? Now, do you know what the predictions are that the labor theory of value makes? Because if you don't know what they are, you wouldn't be in a position to say that you have a theory that makes the same predictions as the labor theory of value, would you? Right?
The predictions that you talked about with the falling prices.
Do you know what the predictions?
For fuck's sake, shut up! You're so annoying.
Do you know what the predictions?
For fuck's sake, shut up!
Do you know what the predictions are that the labor theory of value makes? It's a simple question.
I
didn't ask you about one prediction, right? I asked you if you had a theory. I asked you if you had a theory that predicted all the things that the labor theory of value predicts. Now, do you or don't you?
Okay, Jack, let's not get too excited. I'd like to hear what Agent and Aaron have to say.
We would agree on the point, okay, that given a certain product, let's say television sets, that the price point is going to come down over time as market competition increases. It also probably reaches a point where they start leveling out. Like if you look at TV sets from 1960, say, to 1985, that would be coming down quite a lot. If you keep on following it, there reaches a point where, I don't know, let's say television sets from 2000 to 2016, that it kind of levels out. It reaches a point where it doesn't drop as dramatic. Like, I don't know, new things come onto the market or new innovations push the price back up. But generally, we have a theory that explains for falling prices. What we don't agree with, obviously, is that this leads to the inevitable end of capitalism or anything like that, which is the ultimate endpoint of Marx. Obviously, we reject that point.
All right, so let's clarify, because I'm not getting it. So maybe Helena, since you're preventing me from interrupting, maybe you can explain it to me. I thought that the claim was, Helena, that the labor theory of value was superfluous, right? And I took that to mean that we don't need the labor theory of value to explain all the phenomena that the labor theory of value explains. We have another theory that explains all those same things, right? Now, when I say that the labor theory of value explains things, right, what I'm saying is that it predicts certain long-range trends, right? It offers a theoretical explanation for a certain set of long-range trends, right? Now, it doesn't seem to me that somebody would be in a position to say that the theory is superfluous if they didn't know what the theory predicted, right? But of course, that seems to be the claim that's being made. And so I'm asking people to explain to me,
Jack,
right, excuse me, I'm not done. I'm asking people to explain to me, Helena, right? I'm asking people to explain to me, right, how they could be justified in making that claim without telling me, A, what the predictions are of the labor theory of value.
Listen,
Excuse
Jack.
me,
Listen,
I'm not
Jack.
finished
Listen,
talking.
no, I'm not finished. Listen,
Talking.
Jack. Shut up.
You will get your time when I am done.
Fucking shut up.
You will get your time when I am done. I'm not finished.
Jack,
okay?
we are not here.
I gave you your time.
Jack,
I was quiet while you were talking. Okay? I deferred to what Helena said. She didn't want me to interrupt you. I waited till you were done. And I'm talking now.
Listen,
shut the fuck up, asshole. I'm talking now.
It's important. Okay? It's important that I make this point.
You will get your time to respond.
Right.
Okay? Shut up.
Talk for another 10 minutes.
Fuck up. You will get your time to respond. Okay?
What
now,
a twat.
Now, I am waiting, Helena, right, to hear. I'm waiting for them to support their claim. Right? They're making the claim the theory is superfluous. So, for that to be a justified claim, they'd have to know what the theory is. They'd have to know what the theory predicts, right? And then they'd have to be able to provide the theory, the alternative theory that predicts the same things, and show me how that theory predicts those same things, right? Now, have I gotten an answer to that question, Helena?
Okay, first of all, again, she's just a moderator. Quit bitching at her. Okay, second of all...
I'm not bitching at her. I'm not bitching at her. I'm asking her a question.
Can I make my point now, please?
Go ahead.
My point is here, Jack. We are not here, okay? We are not here to be tested like you as a fucking schoolmaster testing us on the finer points of Marxist theory. We are here to talk about the underlying reality and which of us can explain that reality better, okay? I don't care. I literally couldn't give a shit, okay, about what it predicts and what it doesn't predict. You asked us, okay, how do we account for the falling prices? We told you. You went then back.
That wasn't my question. That wasn't my question.
And then I said,
what was my question to you?
Jack, and then I said, it also predicts the end of capitalism, and we don't think that.
Okay. Is your claim that the theory is superfluous or not? Let's just get it straight.
Yes,
okay.
It is.
Now, for you to claim that it's superfluous, let me understand what that claim is, right? Is that the claim that we can explain everything that the labor theory of value purports to explain by some alternative theory? Is that what the claim is, that it's superfluous? Is that what that is? Excuse me?
A set of theories.
A set of theories. Okay, fine.
Is
that the claim?
Okay, let's just take an example where
I'm just trying to get clear. Wait, I'm trying to get clear on academic agent's claim, right? You're claiming, academic agent, that the theory is superfluous, right? That's your claim, right?
Yep.
Now, is the claim that the theory is superfluous tantamount to saying that everything that the labor theory of value explains, we can explain by an alternative theory, right? Well, is that your claim?
Well, we don't think that the end of capitalism is coming because of the falling prices.
I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you, is your claim that the labor theory of value is superfluous tantamount to the claim that everything that the theory purports to be explained can be explained by an alternative theory?
We talked about falling prices and we explained it in a different way.
Why aren't you answering my question?
Because
I'm trying to understand what you mean when you say the theory is superfluous.
It's not needed for the falling prices, and as far as I'm concerned, the rest of the stuff.
Are those the only things that the theory purports to explain?
I don't care what else. This is the point. This is the thing.
I'm asking you what it means to say that the theory is superfluous. If by that you mean that there's something that the theory explains that we can explain by alternative means, that wouldn't establish the claim that the theory is superfluous. That would just establish that it was superfluous with respect to one issue that you could explain alternatively by some other means, right? In order to explain that the theory itself is superfluous, you'd have to be able to explain all those things by alternative means, right? Now, I'm asking you if that's what you're claiming.
I said.
I'm just asking you if that's what you're claiming. It's a yes or no question.
I said the falling prices we can explain with alternative ways. We don't need to explain the end of capitalism or all the other batshit things that your theology.
Well, again,
explains.
when you make the claim that it's batshit, right? Is that the claim that the predictions are false?
Obviously, that one would be.
I mean, Jesus
Excuse
Christ.
me, does the labor theory of value predict that capitalism should have ended by the year 2017?
The labor theory of value does predict.
That's a yes or no question.
It does no.
Does it?
But
It doesn't predict that. Okay.
So
if it doesn't predict that,
so
it hasn't. If it doesn't predict that, it hasn't been falsified. Now,
It
you might
predicts
say
the end of capitalism. But okay, wait for a second. Good. Okay.
I may have to
It
tap
predicts
out
the
here.
end of
He's doing
capitalism.
fucking-
There is an explanation. There's an explanation for how capitalism should end.
yes.
If
That's right.
if there is a mechanism, if it is causal, if there's some mechanism that the theory provides that dictates or determines how it is that capitalism is supposed
Yes.
to collapse,
Yes.
then that is a prediction of the theory.
Yes. But that prediction is not the prediction that it should have happened by the year 2017, right? So that wouldn't establish that the theory's been falsified. So when I asked, does batshit mean that it's falsified?
Right. Okay. So
I was looking for a claim. I was looking for a claim for a specific prediction that the labor theory of value makes that has not come true.
Okay,
right?
so can I ask a question about
So wait a minute.
that
Wait a
mechanism?
minute.
No,
Wait a
no,
minute.
no.
Wait a minute. That's taking us off topic.
No, I
here.
have an understanding of it. I have an understanding of it, but I want to get it from your mouth whether or not this is correct. Okay, so the labor theory of value, coupled with a few tenets of capitalism about how the rate of profit is going to, that the goal of the capitalist is to maximize profits. The goal of the laborer is to maximize his wages. And so that these forces over time lead to where the capitalist, as he increases the productivity of his factories or whatever he's using to produce his goods, he is able to maximize the profits by decreasing the amount of labor that goes into them. And so over time, there's going to be an increase in alienation of these workers who are being stretched thinner and thinner and thinner as the capitalists acquire more and more and more wealth, to the point that the proletariat is squeezed, and that there's a series of revolts that will overturn capitalism. Is that something like what Marx gives as an explanation of how capitalism would fail?
Well, I mean, he does think that as the indication is that as the capitalist economy approaches total automation, that's going to generate crises of increasing severity. Because of the decline in the rate of profit. But I'm not seeing the relevance of any of this, right? The claim was
the relevance is that as industrialization has taken place over the last 200 years.
The question on the table that we're currently debating has to do with the superfluity of the theory. Right. Now, I asked academic agent. I'm still trying to get him to explain to me what he thinks that claim amounts to. Now, what he said in reply, just a minute. What he said in reply was, we don't need to explain the other batshit things that the theory explains. We can explain this one thing, right, which he claims the theory can explain, but we don't need to explain the other batshit things.
Yeah, because the other one was the fall of capitalism.
And then
why would we as capitalists need to explain the fall of capitalism, Jack?
I'm not finished. Okay, I didn't say that the fall of capitalism was one of the predictions that the theory.
You did in the debate.
No, wait, you did just like a minute ago, dude. Like, what are you talking about?
No, that's not a theory.
Jack, wake up.
That's not a testable.
Wake up. You are asking. It's like you're like
claim.
Jack. You are like Thomas Aquinas. Okay, asking an atheist to try to explain God. That's what you're doing right now.
Now, when you said the other predictions were batshit, right? Were you saying that they were false?
Yes.
Okay. What are the predictions of the labor theory of value? Because for you to say that they're batshit, right, you would have to know what the predictions are. Do you know what they are? Because you'd agree, just a minute, you'd agree, right? You wouldn't be in a position to say the predictions that the theory makes are batshit if you didn't know what the predictions the theory makes are, right?
Jack, you are driving me nuts, okay? It predicts falling prices, and it predicts that this will lead to the end of capitalism.
How does it predict falling prices?
How does it predict falling prices?
Yeah, how does it predict falling prices?
Well, rewind the stream and go back to one of your endless 4-hour rants, and you'll have all the answers in there.
Because you've already falling prices because
I
there's
didn't
a
say
lower
it predicted falling
of
prices.
Unskilled labor.
No, it doesn't predict falling prices. For fuck's sake, I'm not here to be tested. I am not here to be tested like some undergraduate.
The reason why you're being tested.
I am here to explain empirical reality. I'm going to have to, Helena, I'm going to have to go. I can't stand this.
The reason why you're being tested is because you're the one who made the claim that the predictions of the theory are batshit.
No, Jack, you're like a medieval scholastic.
Did you make that claim?
Like a medieval scholastic.
Did you make the claim that the predictions of the theory are batshit?
Of course. I don't think the capitalism is going to end because
you'd have to know what the predictions of the theory are, right? For them to be batshit, for you to know that they
is
were
that one or not?
Right? Is what one of them?
The end of capitalism.
The end of capitalism.
Is it one of the predictions or not, Jack?
We've already been over the end of capitalism.
No, we not, Jack.
It doesn't predict that capitalism will end by the year 2017.
And then you're going to say 2017.
No, that's a straw man. We said nothing about the year. We're just saying, will it end because of this loss of value? That's the question, so that we can form some sort of a claim.
No, the claim is, right? You're misunderstanding what the claim is. I'm saying that the labor theory of value generates a set of predictions, right? There are about 11 of them, right? Now, for the theory to be superfluous, you'd have to be able to explain all those things, right? And so what I'm asking is how somebody could make the claim that the theory was superfluous without actually knowing what the theory predicts.
We know what they are. Okay.
You know what the theory predicts.
Yes.
Tell me what the 11 predictions are.
A tendency, well, I've got them listed here in front of me. A tendency for the value of the rate of profit to decline, which we just fucking explained to you, you moron. Okay. Okay. 2.
You think you have an alternative explanation for the tendency of the rate of profit to decline?
Did I not just lay that out to you?
No, you laid out.
It's explained via the.
You laid out a theory. I thought that what you were doing was laying out a theory of falling prices, right? Is that an explanation for the theory? Is that an explanation for the rate of profit to decline?
Yes, because the profit made per television set. The way that capitalism deals with this is that they sell in greater bulk. So you sell more hamburgers at a lower price, and you make it up that way. So maybe the profits don't decline over time, but we're saying that there is a tendency for the price to come down.
Wait, I didn't ask you about whether there was a tendency for the price to come down. I asked you whether you had an explanation for the tendency of the rate of profit to decline during long wave periods of expansion. Is that what you're offering?
The profit per unit comes down, so they have to sell in greater bulk. What part of that don't you understand?
I'm asking you what your claim is. Is the claim that you have an alternative explanation for the tendency of the rate of profit to decline during long wave periods of expansion? Is that your claim?
Well, it's not exactly the same. Oh my God, you're basically like.
If it's not exactly the same, how is it that you're explaining the same thing rather than explaining something else?
Because what if taxes went up during a long wave period of expansion? Then that would decrease profits.
So frustrating.
Well, right? It wouldn't necessarily decrease profits.
What exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about multiple business cycles? Are we talking about, like, say, farming, for example? Over a long period of time, you had to have a whole shit ton of manual laborers who were farmers to be able to produce anything.
We're talking about increases
profits
in.
Are still there.
We're talking about increases in production.
Listen, Jack. Okay, we are saying, okay, that the price point has a habit of coming down, and therefore the profit.
What's the relevance to that?
Because the profit per unit does decline. So they
and
make
the relevance of that is what?
So they make that up. Well, this is what our theory says. Now, listen.
Why would I be interested in what your theory says unless it says what my theory says?
Okay, okay. Now here's the crux of it, Jack.
Why aren't you answering the question?
Jack, don't
he's about to
interrupt
answer
5 seconds.
Oh yeah?
It's so frustrating.
I can't wait to hear the answer. Go ahead.
Okay, you saying, can you explain the tendency of you're saying, can you explain what my theory says with your theory? Okay, requires me to come to the same conclusion as you. So therefore, you're arguing almost like a kind of, you're basically like a theist saying, look, I've got a theory that explains God. Now I want you as an atheist to explain the same thing with your theory. That's not.
I would like to define the terms.
I don't think that's accurate, right? Because I think
we need to define our terms here.
That's not exactly what we're doing.
Is the theory makes empirical predictions, right, and explains the reasoning for those empirical predictions. If you have another theory that explains the same empirical predictions, and you could say you have competing theory, right? That's really the question.
Right, and our competing theory doesn't say exactly the same thing, but it says something similar, which is that there is a tendency for the profit per unit to decline over the life cycle of a particular product, because obviously products come and go, right? So like, I don't know, look at DVDs. When DVDs first came in, they were very expensive. Then they hit a point where they kind of the cost came down drastically. Then they hit a point where they actually went up again because nobody was and now they're at a point where nobody really wants DVDs, right? They're effectively worthless. So that market is kind of is on the way out. But there is a tendency for prices to come down and the profit per unit to come down at some point in the life cycle of that product. Right?
It's competition.
I don't see the relevance of it, right?
Yeah, I think those are very. I think maybe, and I think the reason Jack is getting frustrated is just because it feels like there's a criticism of theory that's not being understood. I'm not an expert in Marxism, but I do know enough to say that it sounds like you're talking about different things at that point. They're tangentially related in that we're talking about declining.
Well, we're trying to explain the same phenomenon, right? We're going point one.
Are you?
Was that?
I think there's a misunderstanding.
What?
I think there's a misunderstanding because I don't think we're talking about the same phenomenon if we're talking about a specific commodity decline versus, what Marxism is predicting.
Well, what he's saying, from what I understand is, okay, we're just trying to take one market sector and explain how that doesn't decline over time as some sort of a proof for at least one point, right?
Yeah, but what I'm asking for validation of a much stronger claim. That's made.
And I don't think I think there's a misunderstanding here if you're not recognizing that the claim that Jack is talking about, whether it's true or not, is a separate question. But it's a very different claim than what you're.
But here's, I guess what we're saying here is, I'm saying two things. One, we do have an alternative theory that explains similar phenomenon, and two, the reason.
Well, but maybe before you move on.
Wait. We need to establish what it is that we need to be better.
What is the phenomenon? Yeah, because I don't.
Right.
I think that's the question, right?
So
I'm
going a little here.
Okay. So I guess what I'm saying is that what Marx thought he was describing was actually what I've just described. I mean, that's actually how it works in the real world.
Right. I don't hear that at all. I really don't hear that at all. What I hear is expansion, a period of expansion in business, which to me says increasing profits.
No, the point is that during periods of expansion, there's actually a decrease in profits.
Right, but
because you're spending money to build on. You're making new investments.
But under
it's not because of that.
Under economies of scale, you would expect the profits to go up there.
Wait.
Yeah. What do we mean by a long wave period of expansion? 8 years or 50 or 75 years? What is this time period?
Well, I mean, that's going to be a complicated question to resolve, right? But the point is that...
Well, I mean, if it makes a prediction, if the prediction is true, I need to know what time period it was true over.
Okay.
What we're well, I mean, I'd have to direct you to the empirical literature on that, right?
Yes, please do that, because we can't go further unless, I mean,
Well,
it may not even make that
fine,
prediction
but
accurately.
I don't think that that's the crucial issue there.
It is
right?
important. It's very important.
The idea is, the basic idea is, right, that what you have is a period in which you have increasing investment in production. That's the basic idea. Increasing investment in production, which is to say expansion of production, right? Now, Marx postulates a mechanism during that period, which is the increase in the organic composition, what he calls the increase in the organic composition of capital. The basic idea is what we described earlier, that there's going to be a tendency for firms to invest in labor-saving technology in order to gain an advantage on their competitors in the short term, right?
No. That's a long-term investment. It's not a short-term investment.
Well, no, they only gain an advantage in the short term. Because in the long term, what happens is...
The whole industry
you don't invest in capital if you don't intend on making long-term gains, dude.
It's irrelevant what their intentions are, right? The point is they do gain an advantage in the short term, right?
No, you don't, because you have to pay off the capital.
No. The point is that the industry catches up.
That's right.
The industry catches up and also automates.
That's right.
And then
and what happens?
You have falling profit because of the...
Then, yes, you have falling rates of profit. Because the relative weight of labor in the capital outlay has been diminished, which means that the quantity of surplus value will correspondingly diminish, all other things being equal, right? And that is the explanation that Marx gives for why crises inevitably occur.
Right? Guys, I'm going to.
And we're saying is that literally happens the exact opposite way. Like
I'm going to have to close it off. I hate to say that, but I've got to get going. Let's do, I guess, closing statements. Go. What, Simon?
Well, maybe we could just quickly go around the room and finish up on maybe a 30-second finish.
Yeah. Okay. So let's do that. We'll go around the room. I don't have anything to add. This is over my head, but I'm glad that at least now there is a discussion of the labor theory of value explicitly on YouTube for people to refer to. Let's go.
I don't know if anybody wants to go through this fucking more of a discussion, but I mean, okay.
Let's go one at a time. If anybody wants to say anything, and then we'll close it out. I'll keep it open, but I'm going to need to step away. So, and we're going on and on a lot. So let's go ahead and go down the room. Who wants to go first? It looks like
I guess I'll go first because there's a really crucial point that I want to make here, and it's the one that we've been trying to make for this one point, and it just keeps oscillating. Like we never get anywhere with it. Okay, so the amount of value generated or the amount of profits generated over time, over multiple business cycles, does not decrease because of automation. What happens is there is a contraction of the overall market sector. You have, like, for example, take farming or television sets or any of the ones that we brought up. There will be a contraction in that market sector, but it will still be more profitable for the people who have the capital investment in order to generate these products. They are still being able to turn a profit. Otherwise, it would just completely die out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next.
Okay, Yaniv, you want to go next?
No.
Okay. Aaron?
There are a number of questions that I had additional to this on the actual sort of theoretical defenses of the labor theory of value that I had. We didn't get to, but I don't know. I'll just let someone else go. It's fine.
Okay, Simon, you want to say anything?
Yeah, well, okay. Well, I didn't really understand too much about it before, but having listened carefully to it, I do understand that there's some nuance here which I hadn't seen before. So I did like, I I like the idea of tying it to time. I think that's a really good unit. And then explaining that over a long period of time that the inevitable effects of capitalism are to equalize, then I think that has some real power. But yeah, that's kind of what I got from it.
Okay, Jack,
So thank you.
You can go next, and then we'll let Academic Agent have the last word since he was so gracious in agreeing to come. So Jack, you go ahead and go.
Well, Academic Agent started the discussion, or even before the discussion started, said that the labor theory of value was emphatically wrong. He called it nonsense and bonkers, and he called the predictions that the theory makes batshit. He wasn't able to produce a single argument that the theory was ad hoc, empirically falsified, unfalsifiable, or logically incoherent. In fact, he wasn't able to produce any arguments at all. He just had a bunch of assertions, right, that he couldn't justify. I kept asking him to do so. So I invite Academic Agent to come back for another discussion, and this time actually defend the claim rather than repeat the claim that the labor theory of value is wrong, nonsense, and bonkers. I'll leave it there.
Okay, Academic Agent, you have the last word, and then we'll close out.
Yep. Well, the reason that Jack has been unsatisfied with all of my arguments is because he wants to have the debate entirely on his terms. He wants to say, look at my predictions, and why can't you explain the same predictions, and why can't you explain the same predictions as me using a different theory? He basically either wants me to talk about value entirely defined in the way that he defines it, or he wants me to talk about his own predictions, none of which I agree with using my theory. So it seems to me that I've been spending the past 4 hours talking to someone who is an ideologue, someone who doesn't really care about evidence, or there's so many times during the argument that he just said, oh yeah, I've got a bunch of charts somewhere, but they're not important. And yet he puts the burden of proof on me to try to disprove his list of assertions. So yeah, really, I think the whole thing was something of a waste of time, because you might as well, as I said earlier, be talking to a hardcore fundamentalist Christian about why God doesn't exist.
Okay, so thank you all for coming, and maybe if we manage to do this again, we can look at one of the theories that you hold, Academic Agent, and kind of do it in reverse.
If we could put the flamethrowers away next time, that'd be wonderful.
Sorry?
I said if we could put the flamethrowers away next time, that would be wonderful, because I don't feel like there was any real discussion here for a while. Like, there was an hour just yelling, and I don't think that's productive for anybody.
Yeah.
Well, we've got strong personalities in here. I do the best I can. I think we did get a lot of good stuff at the beginning. I don't think it was necessarily terrible at the end. There were moments of heated exchange. That's just how things go, and that's the best I can do so far. It's way over my head as it is. So I just want to say thank you to everybody, and I'll go off air. Thank you for watching.